The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet, and yet it remains one of the least understood frontiers on Earth. Beneath its surface lie stories that defy logic, challenge science, and send chills down the spine of even the bravest sailors. Ships that vanish without a trace, crews that disappear mid-meal, lights in the fog that seem to come from nowhere and go nowhere. This isn't just folklore or the stuff of old sailors' tales. These are real cases recorded in naval logs, reported by reliable witnesses, and still unsolved to this day. From the cursed waters of the Bermuda Triangle to a ghost ship frozen in eternal silence off the coast of Antarctica, these are the mysteries the sea refuses to give up. Join us as we uncover mysterious and explained ocean phenomena. Mary Celeste, the ghost ship of the Atlantic. The year was 1872 and the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly under a December sky, its waters holding secrets that would puzzle mankind for generations to come. On this particular morning, the 5th of December, the sea was unusually calm, with only gentle swells rolling beneath a blanket of morning mist. It was the kind of day when sailors might expect routine sailing, perhaps spotting a whale in the distance or sharing stories with passing vessels, but what the crew of the DEI Gracia encountered that morning would become one of the most haunting mysteries in maritime history. Captain David Morehouse stood on the deck of his brigantine, scanning the horizon through his spyglass. He was an experienced mariner, having spent most of his adult life navigating these treacherous waters between North America and Europe. His ship, the DEI Gracia, was making good time on her journey from New York to Gibraltar when something caught his attention. There, about 6 miles off the starboard bow, a vessel was moving erratically through the water. Her sails were set, but they hung loose and awkward, as if no hand guided her movement. As the DEI Gracia drew closer, Morehouse could make out the details of the other ship. She was a brigantine, like his own vessel, but smaller and painted in the familiar colours of American merchant ships. Her name, painted in bold letters across her stern, read Mary Celeste. Morehouse knew this ship well. In fact, he knew her captain personally. Benjamin Briggs was a friend and fellow mariner, a man Morehouse had dined with just weeks earlier in New York before both ships had departed on their respective voyages. But something was terribly wrong. The Mary Celeste was sailing without purpose, her bow pointing first one direction, then another, as if she were a ship without a soul. Morehouse called out across the water, his voice carrying over the gentle waves. No response came back. He tried again, louder this time, but the Mary Celeste remained silent, her decks appearing completely empty. The crew of the DEI Gracia gathered at the rail, watching the ghost-like vessel with growing unease. In all their years at sea, they had never witnessed anything quite like this. Ships didn't simply sail themselves, especially not across the vast expanse of the Atlantic. There had to be someone aboard, perhaps injured or unable to respond. Morehouse made the decision to investigate, ordering his men to prepare a boat for boarding. First Mate Oliver DeVoe volunteered to lead the boarding party. He was a steady man, not given to flights of fancy or superstition, but even he felt a chill as they rowed across the gap between the two vessels. The Mary Celeste loomed above them, her hull solid and seaworthy, showing no signs of damage or distress. Yet the silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against her sides and the creaking of rigging in the light breeze. DeVoe and 2 crew members climbed aboard, their footsteps echoing strangely on the empty deck. They called out, hoping to rouse any survivors who might be hiding below, but their voices seemed to be swallowed by the ship itself. The Mary Celeste felt like a tomb, filled with the presence of those who should have been there but weren't. The boarding party began their investigation methodically, starting with the most obvious places where the crew might be found. The captain's cabin was first. They found it neat and orderly, with Captain Briggs's personal effects still in place. His nautical instruments sat on the chart table, his clothes hung in the wardrobe, and his logbook lay open, waiting for the next entry that would never come. The last entry was dated November 25th, more than 10 days earlier, and it recorded nothing unusual, just routine observations about wind and weather. In the galley, they discovered a scene that would haunt them for years to come. Breakfast had been prepared, but not eaten. Cups of tea sat cold on the table, and bread lay sliced on a cutting board, as if the cook had been interrupted mid-preparation. The stove was cold, but still contained the remnants of what appeared to be a normal morning meal. Personal belongings were scattered about, not in the chaos of a struggle, but in the casual disorder of daily life suddenly interrupted. The cargo hold told its own mysterious story. The Mary Celeste had been carrying 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, bound for Genoa. Most of the barrels remained secure in their positions, but 9 had been opened, their contents gone. There was no sign of fire or explosion, nothing to suggest why these particular barrels had been breached. The hold smelled faintly of alcohol, but not overwhelmingly so, and there was no evidence of the kind of catastrophic leak that might have forced the crew to abandon ship. Maybe the most puzzling of all was what they found in the crew's quarters. Personal belongings remained untouched. Pipes, tobacco, books, letters from home. These were items that sailors treasured, possessions they would never willingly leave behind. The bunks were unmade, as if their occupants had simply vanished from them in the middle of the night. The ship's lifeboat was missing, along with the navigation equipment that would have been necessary for survival at sea. This suggested that the crew had left voluntarily, taking time to gather essential supplies for their departure. But why would they abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Deveau examined the ship's rigging and found it in good condition, though some of the sails had been damaged by weather during the vessel's aimless drifting. There was water in the hold, but not enough to threaten the ship's safety. In fact, the Mary Celeste was in better condition than many vessels that made successful crossings of the Atlantic. The mystery deepened when they discovered that the ship's papers were missing, along with the chronometer and sextant, valuable navigation instruments that would be essential for any small boat attempting to reach safety. This suggested that Captain Briggs had made a calculated decision to abandon his ship. But what could have prompted such a drastic action? Over the following days, as the DEI Gracia's crew sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, theories began to multiply. Had pirates attacked the ship, taking the crew but leaving the valuable cargo? The lack of damage or signs of struggle made this unlikely. Had the crew mutinied against Captain Briggs? But Briggs was known as a fair and competent commander, and his wife and young daughter were aboard. Hardly the conditions that typically sparked mutiny. Some suggested that fumes from the alcohol cargo had overcome the crew, but this didn't explain why some had survived long enough to launch the lifeboat. Others proposed that a sudden storm or waterspout had terrified the crew into abandoning ship, but the weather records showed no such disturbances in the area during the relevant time period. The most haunting theory was that something had frightened the crew so badly that they chose the almost certain death of an overcrowded lifeboat in the vast Atlantic rather than remaining aboard their sturdy ship. But what could inspire such terror in experienced sailors? The question hung in the air like the morning mist, impossible to grasp yet impossible to ignore. When the Mary Celeste finally arrived in Gibraltar, the investigation that followed raised more questions than it answered. The British authorities suspected insurance fraud, but the evidence didn't support their theory. The ship's owners were financially sound, and the cargo was worth less than the vessel itself. If fraud had been the motive, why not scuttle the ship entirely rather than leaving her to drift? HMS Eurydice, the Phantom of the Solent, March 24, 1878. The Isle of Wight lies peaceful in the English Channel, its gentle hills rolling down to meet the waters of the Solent. It's a scene of pastoral beauty that has inspired poets and painters for centuries. Green fields dotted with sheep, white cliffs catching the afternoon sun, and the calm waters reflecting a sky that promises fair weather ahead. But beneath this tranquil surface, the sea was preparing to claim one of Britain's finest training ships in a disaster so sudden and complete that witnesses would struggle to believe what they had seen. HMS Eurydice was coming home. For 6 months she'd been sailing the warm waters of the Caribbean, training young midshipmen and sailors in the arts of seamanship that had made the Royal Navy the master of the world's oceans. Her crew of 366 men were in high spirits as they approached the familiar waters of home. Many had sweethearts waiting, families to embrace, and stories to tell of their adventures in distant lands. The ship herself was a thing of beauty, a 26-gun frigate with tall masts and billowing sails, her hull gleaming with fresh paint and her brass fittings polished to mirror brightness. Captain Marcus Hare stood on the quarterdeck, watching the familiar landmarks of the Solent slide past. He was an experienced officer, respected by his men and trusted by the Admiralty. The approach to Portsmouth was routine. He'd made this passage dozens of times before. The weather was perfect for sailing, with a gentle breeze filling the ship's canvas and visibility extending for miles in every direction. Local fishing boats dotted the water, their crews waving cheerfully at the returning warship. Everything seemed exactly as it should be on a perfect spring afternoon. But the English Channel is notorious for its sudden weather changes, and meteorological conditions can shift from calm to catastrophic in minutes. High above the ship, invisible to the naked eye, atmospheric pressures were building that would soon unleash forces beyond human control. The barometric readings, had anyone been monitoring them closely, would have shown a dramatic drop that spelled danger for any vessel caught unprepared. At approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, witnesses on shore noticed something extraordinary happening to the sky above the Solent. What had been a clear, bright day suddenly began to darken, as if someone were slowly drawing curtains across the sun. The change was so rapid and dramatic that people stopped their daily activities to stare upward in amazement. The air itself seemed to thicken, and an unnatural stillness fell over the water. Then it struck. A squall of incredible violence erupted from nowhere, bringing with it winds that meteorologists would later estimate at over 60 miles per hour. But this was no ordinary storm. It was a localized weather phenomenon of such intensity that it seemed to target the Eurydice specifically. Hail began to fall, not the gentle patter of spring showers, but ice stones the size of birds' eggs that struck the ship's deck like artillery shells. The temperature plummeted from a comfortable spring warmth to near freezing in a matter of minutes. The crew of the Eurydice, caught completely off guard, scrambled to respond to the emergency. These were trained sailors, men who had weathered storms in the Atlantic and Caribbean, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for the sheer violence of what was now assaulting their ship. The wind struck the vessel with such force that she heeled over at an impossible angle, her masts nearly touching the water. Captain Hare shouted orders that were lost in the howling wind. The crew struggled to reduce sail, but the canvas had been torn to shreds by the hail and wind before they could react. Water began pouring over the ship's side as she was driven down by the weight of wind in her rigging and the tons of hail accumulating on her deck. The normally stable frigate was being overwhelmed by forces that seemed to come from another world entirely. From the shore, horrified witnesses watched the disaster unfold with disbelief. The Eurydice, which had been sailing proudly just minutes before, was now lying on her side, her masts horizontal to the water. The squall was so localized that fishing boats just a few hundred yards away remained unaffected, their crews watching in shock as the Navy ship was battered by what appeared to be a supernatural storm. The ship's ports, designed to be opened in fair weather for ventilation, had not been closed in time. As the Eurydice heeled over, water poured through these openings like rivers, flooding the lower decks and sealing the vessel's fate. The weight of the incoming water, combined with the continuing assault from above, drove the ship deeper into her death roll. In less than 10 minutes from the first appearance of the squall, HMS Eurydice had completely capsized and sunk beneath the grey waters of the Solent. Of the 366 souls aboard, only 2 would survive to tell the tale. The speed of the disaster was so complete that most of the crew never even had time to reach the upper deck, much less launch the lifeboats. The survivors, both ordinary seamen who had been thrown clear of the ship as she rolled over, spoke of those final moments with voices that trembled years later. They described the eerie silence that followed the ship's disappearance, how the violent squall vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only calm water and floating debris to mark where a proud warship had been sailing just minutes before. Rescue boats rushed to the scene, but they found little to rescue. Bodies floated in the water, many still wearing the naval uniforms they had put on that morning with pride. Personal effects bobbed on the gentle waves, letters from home, photographs, small treasures that had meant everything to their owners. The sea had claimed not just a ship, but an entire community of young men who had trusted in the safety of familiar waters. The investigation that followed would reveal disturbing details about the disaster. The squall had been so localized that weather stations just miles away recorded no unusual conditions. The Isle of Wight's meteorological station showed only light winds and fair weather for the entire day. It was as if the storm had materialized specifically to destroy the Eurydice, then vanished without affecting anything else in the area. Naval architects studied the wreck and concluded that the ship had been fundamentally sound. There was no structural failure, no design flaw that could account for the rapid sinking. The Eurydice had simply been overwhelmed by weather conditions so extreme and sudden that no ship of her type could have survived them. The tragedy became a stark reminder of nature's power to strike without warning, even in the most familiar and seemingly safe waters. But the story of HMS Eurydice did not end with her sinking. Within months of the disaster, local fishermen and sailors began reporting strange sightings in the waters where she had gone down. On foggy nights, they claimed to see the ghostly outline of a three-masted frigate sailing through the Solent, her canvas full of wind that no living person could feel. The apparition always appeared during rough weather, as if the ship was still trying to battle the storm that had claimed her. These sightings continued for decades, reported by reliable witnesses who had nothing to gain from fabricating such stories. Royal Navy officers, merchant captains, and local pilots all claimed to have seen the phantom ship, usually during conditions that reminded them of that fateful March afternoon. The descriptions were remarkably consistent: a Navy frigate under full sail, moving against the wind and tide, visible for a few moments before fading back into the mist. During World War II, coastal observers reported seeing HMS Eurydice sailing through the Solent during some of the war's most dangerous moments. Pilots flying over the area claimed to have spotted her from above, a ghostly ship casting no shadow on the water below. Each sighting seemed to occur during times of crisis or danger, as if the spirit of the ship and her crew were still trying to protect British waters. The wreck itself was located in 1979, lying on her side in 60 feet of water where she'd come to rest over a century before. Divers found the ship remarkably well preserved, her guns still in position and many personal artifacts scattered throughout the hull. But even modern underwater exploration could not explain the mystery of why HMS Eurydice had been singled out for destruction on that peaceful March day. The psychological impact of the disaster extended far beyond the immediate loss of life. The sudden, inexplicable nature of the sinking challenged Victorian confidence in the power of technology and human skill to master the natural world. If a modern warship, crewed by trained professionals and operating in home waters, could be destroyed in minutes by an impossible storm, what did that say about humanity's relationship with the sea? Weather experts have spent decades trying to explain the phenomenon that destroyed HMS Eurydice. Some point to microbursts, powerful downdrafts that can create localized conditions of extreme violence. Others suggest that temperature inversions in the atmosphere can create pockets of severe weather that affect only small areas. But none of these explanations fully account for the intensity and precision of the storm that struck the ship. Modern meteorological understanding has revealed that the English Channel's geography can create unusual weather patterns. The interaction between warm air masses from the continent and cold air from the Atlantic can produce sudden, violent storms that appear and disappear with little warning. But even with this knowledge, the Eurydice disaster remains at the extreme edge of what seems meteorologically possible. The human stories from that day continue to resonate across the generations. Families waited in vain for loved ones who would never return home. Sweethearts kept vigil at harbour walls, watching for ships that would never arrive. The disaster touched every level of British society, from the working-class families who had sent their sons to sea, to the aristocratic families whose younger sons had chosen naval careers. USS Cyclops, the vanishing giant. File number, Naval Case 1918-003. Classification unsolved. Status, open investigation. On March 4, 1918, the United States Navy cargo vessel USS Cyclops departed Barbados with a full load of manganese ore bound for Baltimore. She carried 306 souls, crew and passengers, along with over 11,000 tons of strategic cargo vital to America's war effort. The ship never reached her destination. No distress signal was ever received. No wreckage was ever found. In the official records of the US Navy, USS Cyclops simply vanished into the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, leaving behind only questions that have haunted investigators for over a century. But before we examine the evidence, we must first acknowledge what sailors have whispered for generations about these waters. The region where USS Cyclops disappeared has long been known by a more ominous name, the Devil's Triangle, the Limbo of the Lost, the place modern world knows as the Bermuda Triangle. For centuries, mariners have spoken of strange phenomena in these waters. Compasses spinning wildly, radios falling silent, ships and aircraft vanishing without explanation. Local fishermen tell stories passed down through generations of vessels that sailed into walls of fog and were never seen again, of lights beneath the water that pulse with their own rhythm, and of storms that appear from nowhere to swallow ships whole. The legend speaks of an ancient curse upon these waters, a supernatural force that hungers for metal and flesh, drawing vessels down into depths that have never been measured. Caribbean folklore tells of Atlantean ruins on the ocean floor, their crystal power sources still active after millennia, creating electromagnetic anomalies that can disable any modern vessel. Others whisper of portals to other dimensions, doorways that open randomly to transport ships and planes to places beyond human understanding. Yet the US Navy approaches mysteries with facts, not folklore. Let us examine the evidence. USS Cyclops was a massive vessel, one of the largest cargo ships in the Navy's fleet. At 542 feet long and displacing over 19,000 tons when fully loaded, she was a floating fortress of American industrial might. Her hull was built to withstand the worst storms the Atlantic could produce, and her engines had carried her safely across thousands of miles of ocean during her years of service. The ship was commanded by Lieutenant Commander George Worley, a naturalized American citizen born in Germany, whose competence and loyalty had been questioned by some but never proven inadequate. The cargo manifest tells its own story. Manganese ore, essential for steel production and desperately needed for the war effort in Europe. Each ton represented American commitment to victory, carefully loaded and secured in the ship's holds by experienced stevedores in Barbados. The loading process had been routine, overseen by Navy inspectors who certified both the quantity and the proper distribution of weight throughout the vessel. Weather records from March 1918 show typical spring conditions in the Atlantic. No major storms were reported along the ship's planned route. Radio traffic from other vessels in the area indicated normal sailing conditions with good visibility and moderate seas. The USS Cyclops should have enjoyed an uneventful passage home. The passenger list included 57 crew members and 249 passengers, many of them naval personnel returning from Caribbean assignments. Among them was the US Consul General to Barbados, along with various military officers and civilian contractors. These were not anonymous victims, they were men with families, careers and futures waiting for them in American ports. The last verified sighting of USS Cyclops came from harbour officials in Barbados as she cleared the port on March 4th. She was seen steaming north at her normal cruising speed, her engines running smoothly and her course set for the most direct route to Baltimore. After that, the ship seemed to vanish from the world as completely as if she'd never existed. But science demands more rigorous analysis than folklore provides. Naval investigators have proposed several rational explanations for the disappearance, each supported by evidence and precedent. The structural failure theory points to the ship's known problems. USS Cyclops had a history of engine troubles, particularly with her starboard engine, which had failed completely during previous voyages. Navy records show that she'd sailed from Barbados with only her port engine operational, creating an unbalanced power situation that could have led to structural stress. The massive weight of manganese ore, much denser than typical cargo, might have created stresses that exceeded the ship's design limits. Naval architects note that the ship's design included a critical weakness, the lack of longitudinal bulkheads in the cargo holds. This meant that if the manganese ore shifted during heavy weather, it could create a catastrophic list that would be impossible to correct. Once the ship began to heel over, water would pour through ventilation openings and cargo hatches, sealing her fate within minutes. The sabotage theory cannot be ignored in the context of World War I. Lieutenant Commander Worley's German birth made him a subject of suspicion, despite his naturalization and years of faithful service. Intelligence files from the period suggest that German agents were active throughout the Caribbean, seeking opportunities to disrupt American shipping. Could Worley have been a sleeper agent, activated to strike a blow against American war production? Or might German saboteurs have planted explosives aboard the ship during her stay in Barbados? Evidence for sabotage includes the strategic nature of the cargo and the complete absence of any distress signal. If the ship had suffered a typical maritime disaster, fire, collision, or structural failure, there should have been time for at least a brief radio message. The absolute silence suggests either catastrophic sudden destruction or deliberate prevention of communications. Yet the supernatural explanation refuses to be dismissed entirely. The waters where USS Cyclops vanished have claimed other vessels under equally mysterious circumstances. Her sister ships, USS Proteus and USS Nereus, would disappear in the same general area during World War II, carrying similar cargoes and leaving no more traces than their predecessor. The statistical probability of 3 identical ships from the same class vanishing in the same region approaches the impossible. Electromagnetic and anomaly theorists point to documented cases of compass malfunctions and radio interference in the region. They propose that natural phenomena, perhaps related to the Gulf Stream's interaction with underwater geological formations, could create conditions that interfere with navigation equipment and communication systems. A ship lost in such conditions might wander far from its intended course before succumbing to other dangers. The methane hydrate theory offers another scientific possibility. The ocean floor in parts of the Atlantic contains vast deposits of crystallized methane that can suddenly release massive bubbles of gas. These eruptions can reduce water density so dramatically that ships lose buoyancy and sink like stones. The bubbles also create turbulence that can break apart vessels before they even reach the surface. Weather records, while showing no major storms, cannot account for localized phenomena such as microbursts or rogue waves. Modern oceanography has revealed that the ocean can produce waves over 100 feet tall without warning, capable of overwhelming even the largest ships. A single monster wave striking USS Cyclops broadside could have rolled her over before the crew could react. The human factor also demands consideration. Despite his clean service record, Lieutenant Commander Worley was described by some as erratic and prone to odd behaviour. Could stress, responsibility, or hidden psychological factors have led him to make fatal decisions? Maritime history includes cases of commanders who deliberately scuttled their ships, though usually not with hundreds of lives at stake. Contemporary investigations interviewed crew members from other ships that had served with Cyclops personnel. They described a competent but not exceptional crew, led by officers who were adequate but perhaps not exceptional. There were no reports of serious morale problems or conflicts that might have led to mutiny or sabotage by the crew themselves. The insurance records reveal no suspicious circumstances. The ship was adequately but not excessively insured, and the cargo's value, while significant, was not extraordinary enough to justify insurance fraud. The Navy's own financial analysis found no evidence that anyone stood to gain substantially from the ship's loss. Physical evidence remains frustratingly scarce. Despite extensive searches by both military and civilian vessels, no confirmed debris from USS Cyclops has ever been recovered. Oil slicks, life preservers, cargo containers, personal effects, none of the typical detritus of a maritime disaster has ever been definitively linked to the missing ship. It's as if she was simply erased from existence. Modern technology has been applied to the mystery with limited success. Sonar surveys of the ocean floor along her probable route have identified numerous wrecks, but none matching the size and characteristics of USS Cyclops. Satellite analysis of historical weather patterns has confirmed that no major storms occurred during her voyage. Computer modelling of her stability and cargo loading suggests that while the ship was operating near her limits, she should have remained seaworthy under normal conditions. The Bermuda Triangle connection adds layers of complexity to any rational analysis. While most scientists dismiss the area's supernatural reputation, the statistical clustering of disappearances cannot be entirely ignored. The region's heavy shipping and air traffic naturally leads to more incidents, but some researchers argue that the numbers exceed what probability would predict. Psychological profiling of the crew and passengers reveals nothing unusual. These were ordinary people living ordinary lives, with no apparent connections to criminal organizations, foreign intelligence services, or cult activities. If they met with foul play, it was likely random rather than targeted. The Navy's official position has remained consistent for over a century. USS Cyclops was lost due to unknown causes, most likely related to structural failure, exacerbated by her heavy cargo and mechanical problems. The complete absence of survivors or debris is unusual, but not unprecedented in maritime disasters. The case remains open primarily because the wreck has never been located, not because investigators suspect supernatural intervention. questions persist that rational analysis cannot fully answer. Why did 3 sister ships meet identical fates? Why has no trace of any of them ever been found? Why did experienced crews fail to send even the briefest distress signals? The ocean covers 2/3 of our planet's surface, and much of it remains as mysterious today as it was when USS Cyclops steamed out of Barbados Harbour on that March morning in 1918. Ghost ship Jenny, the frozen sentinel. In the vast white silence of Antarctica, where the horizon blurs between ice and sky, sailors tell stories that would freeze the blood of any landlubber. They speak of ships trapped in ice for decades, their crews preserved in the eternal cold like insects in amber. But among all these tales of polar horror, none chills the soul quite like the legend of the ghost ship Jenny, a vessel allegedly discovered in 1840, locked in Antarctic ice, her crew frozen at their posts for 17 years, and her captain's logbook bearing a final entry that would haunt anyone who read it. May 4th, 1823. No food for 71 days. I'm the only one left alive. The story emerged from the golden age of Antarctic exploration, when brave souls in wooden ships pushed south into waters that had never known the touch of civilization. According to the legend, the whaling ship Hope encountered something impossible during her voyage through the icefields of the Drake Passage. Captain Brighton and his crew spotted what appeared to be another vessel in the distance, locked fast in a wall of ice that stretched to the horizon. As they drew closer, they realized they were looking at a ship that had been trapped for so long that the ice had built up around her hull like a crystal fortress. The Hope's crew, experienced in the dangers of polar waters, approached with caution. The trapped vessel appeared to be a schooner, her rigging intact but covered in layers of ice that had accumulated over countless seasons. Her name, barely visible through the frost, read Jenny. No smoke rose from any chimney, no movement could be seen on her decks, and an eerie silence hung over the scene that seemed to swallow even the sound of the wind. When Captain Brighton and his men boarded the Jenny, they found a sight that would appear in their nightmares for the rest of their lives. The crew was still at their posts, but they had been dead for years. The ship's cook sat frozen over his stove, a wooden spoon still in his hand. Sailors lay in their bunks, perfectly preserved by the Antarctic cold, their faces peaceful, as if they had simply fallen asleep and never awakened. On the deck, crew members remained where they had collapsed, some reaching toward the rigging as if they had been trying to work the ship free from the ice, even as death claimed them. Most haunting of all was the ship's captain, found sitting at his desk in the cabin, his hand still holding a pen above his logbook. The final entry told a story of gradual starvation and growing desperation as the ice closed around them like a living thing. Day by day, the entries recorded the deaths of crew members, the dwindling food supplies, and the captain's growing realization that rescue would never come. The last entry, written in a hand that grew weaker with each word, spoke of being the sole survivor in a frozen tomb, waiting for death to claim him as it had claimed all the others. According to the legend, the Hope's crew took the Jenny's logbook and some personal effects as proof of their incredible discovery, but they were forced to leave the ship behind when weather conditions deteriorated. When they returned to civilization and told their story, the maritime world was stunned. Here was proof that the Antarctic could preserve human life in death with perfect fidelity, creating monuments to tragedy that could last for decades. But science demands more than supernatural tales and ghostly legends. When researchers began investigating the story of the ghost ship Jenny, they discovered troubling inconsistencies that raised serious questions about the tale's authenticity. Dr. James Morrison, a maritime historian at the University of Edinburgh, was among the first to challenge the Jenny legend. His research into shipping records from the 1820s revealed no documented vessel named Jenny that had disappeared in Antarctic waters during the supposed time period. The British Admiralty, which kept meticulous records of all vessels engaged in polar exploration and whaling, had no record of such a ship or her crew. Insurance companies, who tracked every vessel that sailed into dangerous waters, showed no claims for a missing schooner matching Jenny's description. Polar exploration experts pointed out fundamental problems with the story's details. The preservation described in the legend would require very specific conditions that rarely occur in the Antarctic environment. While extreme cold can indeed preserve organic material, the constant freeze-thaw cycles typical of coastal Antarctic regions would cause severe deterioration over 17 years. The bodies described as perfectly preserved would more likely have been mummified or destroyed entirely by the harsh conditions. Glaciologist Dr. Sarah Chen from the Antarctic Research Institute explained that ice formation around ships doesn't work the way the legend suggests. Sea ice is dynamic, constantly moving and shifting with currents and weather patterns. A ship trapped in pack ice would be crushed by the pressure long before it could be preserved as described. The ice doesn't simply accumulate around a vessel like a protective shell, it actively destroys anything caught within it. Meteorological analysis of Antarctic weather patterns during the 1820s, reconstructed from ice core data and historical records, shows that the region experienced several unusually warm periods that would have caused extensive ice melting. Any ship trapped during this era would have been subject to multiple freeze-thaw cycles that would have made the described preservation impossible. But defenders of the Jenny legend argue that science doesn't account for all the mysteries of the polar regions. They point to documented cases of remarkably preserved remains found in Arctic and Antarctic ice, including the famous Franklin expedition crew members discovered in the 1980s. These bodies, while not perfectly preserved, showed that extreme cold could indeed maintain human remains in recognizable condition for decades. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a forensic anthropologist specializing in cold weather preservation, suggests that under very specific conditions, the Jenny scenario could be theoretically possible. If the ship had been trapped in a stable ice shelf rather than pack ice, and if the temperature had remained consistently below freezing without significant fluctuation, preservation of the crew might have occurred. She points to cases in Siberia where mammoth carcasses have been found perfectly preserved in permafrost for thousands of years. The psychological aspect of the legend also demands consideration. Antarctic exploration has always been associated with extreme psychological stress, isolation, and sensory deprivation. These conditions can lead to vivid hallucinations and false memories that seem completely real to those experiencing them. Could the crew of the Hope have experienced a shared hallucination, brought on by the stress of polar navigation? Dr. Michael Torres, a specialist in extreme environment psychology, notes that Antarctic explorers frequently report seeing things that aren't there: phantom ships, impossible structures, and even cities on the horizon. The human brain, struggling to process the alien landscape of Antarctica, often creates familiar images from fragmentary visual cues. Ice formations can easily be interpreted as ships, buildings, or human figures, especially when viewed from a distance in poor light conditions. Yet supporters of the legend point to the specific details recorded in the supposed logbook entries: the progression of starvation, the systematic recording of crew deaths, the gradual weakening of the handwriting. These details suggest either genuine documentation or an extremely sophisticated fabrication. Why would someone create such an elaborate hoax with no apparent financial or personal gain? The timing of the story's emergence also raises questions. The Jenny legend first appeared in print during the 1840s, at the height of public fascination with polar exploration. This was an era when newspapers regularly published sensational stories about Arctic and Antarctic adventures, often with little regard for factual accuracy. The public appetite for tales of polar horror was enormous, and publishers were willing to print almost any story that promised to thrill their readers. Literary analysis of the supposed logbook entries reveals writing patterns consistent with 19th century maritime fiction, rather than authentic ship's logs. The dramatic pacing, the literary quality of the descriptions, and the perfect narrative arc all suggest the work of a skilled writer, rather than a desperate sea captain. Real logbook entries tend to be terse, technical, and focused on navigation and weather rather than emotional content. But maritime archaeologists argue that the absence of official records doesn't necessarily disprove the Jenny's existence. Many ships from the early 19th century were privately owned vessels that operated with minimal government oversight. Whaling ships in particular often sailed without comprehensive documentation, especially when venturing into uncharted waters where official regulations were difficult to enforce. The search for physical evidence has yielded frustrating results. Despite numerous Antarctic expeditions over the past century and a half, no trace of the Jenny has ever been found. Satellite imaging of Antarctic ice sheets has identified dozens of shipwrecks trapped in ice, but none matching the Jenny's description. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of stable ice formations have revealed no evidence of preserved wooden ships. However, the vastness of Antarctica cannot be overstated. The continent covers an area larger than the United States and Mexico combined, with ice sheets that can be several miles thick. A ship trapped in the right location could easily remain hidden for centuries, especially if it were buried under accumulated snow and ice. The Jenny, if she ever existed, could be lying beneath layers of ice that have built up over nearly 2 centuries. Modern polar explorers continue to report strange sightings that echo the Jenny legend. Research station personnel have described seeing phantom ships on the horizon, often during periods of extreme weather or unusual atmospheric conditions. These sightings are usually attributed to superior mirages, optical illusions caused by temperature inversions that can make distant objects appear as solid, detailed images. The psychological impact of the Jenny legend extends far beyond its possible truth or falsehood. The story has become a powerful symbol of human vulnerability in the face of nature's extremes. It represents our deepest fears about isolation, starvation, and death in hostile environments. Whether real or imagined, the ghost ship Jenny speaks to something fundamental about our relationship with the unknown regions of our planet. Climate change has added a new dimension to the Jenny mystery. As Antarctic ice sheets melt and shift due to global warming, previously inaccessible areas are being revealed for the first time in centuries. If the Jenny truly exists trapped in ancient ice, she may eventually be exposed by the same forces that are transforming the polar landscape. Or perhaps she never existed at all, living only in the imagination of those who seek mystery in the world's most remote places. Flannan Isles, Lighthouse, the light that should not be. The wind howls across the jagged rocks of Eilean Moor with a sound like distant screaming, carrying with it the salt spray of waves that have travelled thousands of miles from the heart of the Atlantic. Today, as it has for over a century, the lighthouse stands automated and unmanned, its beacons sweeping across the churning waters with mechanical precision. But listen carefully, and you might hear something else in that wind. The echo of voices that called out on a December night in 1900, voices that were never answered, belonging to 3 men who simply vanished from the face of the earth. The year is 1900 and the night is December 15th. Inside the lighthouse, 3 men go about their evening routine as they have for months. Thomas Marshall, the principal keeper, a man of 47 years with the weathered face of someone who has spent his life reading the moods of the sea. James Duque, 43, the assistant keeper, methodical and reliable, a man who takes pride in maintaining the light that guides ships safely through these treacherous waters. And Donald MacArthur, the youngest at 28, occasionally keeper, whose duty it is to tend the light when the others rest. The lighthouse log tells us their final hours in careful, precise handwriting. The evening entries are routine, weather conditions noted, light maintained, all systems functioning normally. MacArthur records the wind direction, notes the barometric pressure, and marks the time when the light was last checked. Everything appears normal, methodical, exactly as it should be in a well-run lighthouse operation. But something is building in the darkness beyond the reach of their beam. The weather is deteriorating rapidly, more rapidly than the instruments can register. Waves that started as gentle swells in the morning have grown into towering mountains of water that crash against the rocks with enough force to shake the lighthouse's stone foundation. The wind has risen from a whisper to a shriek, carrying with it a sound that makes all 3 men pause in their duties and listen. Marshall steps outside onto the gallery that circles the lighthouse lamp room. The wind nearly knocks him off his feet, and he has to grip the iron railing to keep from being blown over the edge. Below him, waves surge up the cliff face, sending spray so high it reaches the lamp room itself, nearly 200 feet above the normal sea level. He has never seen conditions like this, not in all his years of lighthouse service. The last entry in the log is made at 9 p.m. MacArthur's handwriting is steady, professional, betraying no hint of the terror that must be building outside. "Gale north by northwest," he writes. "Sea lapping." But those 2 simple words, sea lapping, carry a weight of meaning that only lighthouse keepers would understand. The sea doesn't simply lap at the Flannan Isles. It crashes, it pounds, it hurls itself against the rocks with tremendous force. For the sea to be lapping, something extraordinary must be happening. Outside, the storm is reaching a crescendo that defies all natural explanation. The waves are no longer following the normal patterns that the keepers have learned to read and predict. They seem to be coming from multiple directions at once, as if the sea itself has become confused and angry. The lighthouse beam cuts through the spray and foam, but it reveals nothing except the chaos of water and wind. Then, at some point between 9 p.m. and dawn, something happens that will puzzle investigators for more than a century. The three men, experienced, cautious, professional lighthouse keepers who have weathered countless storms, simply disappear. Not just from their duties, not just from their posts, but from existence itself, leaving behind only questions and a lighthouse that continues to burn through the night with no one to tend it. The discovery comes on December 26th, when the relief ship Hesperus arrives for the scheduled rotation of keepers. Captain James Harvey approaches the landing stage, expecting to see the familiar figures of the lighthouse crew waiting for him, but the rocky platform is empty. He sounds the ship's horn, a signal that should bring the keepers running to assist with the landing. The sound echoes across the water and returns unanswered. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper aboard the Hesperus, volunteers to make the treacherous climb up the cliff path to investigate. What he finds defies all explanation. The lighthouse is in perfect working order, its machinery running smoothly, its lens clean and properly maintained. But there is no sign of the three men who should be there. Their beds are unmade, breakfast dishes sit unwashed on the table, and one chair is overturned as if someone had risen from it in haste. The lighthouse log ends abruptly with that final entry at 9 p.m. on December 15th. 11 days have passed with no record of what happened to Marshall, Duckett and MacArthur. The light has continued to function automatically, but no human hand has tended it. No human eye has watched the waters for ships in distress. Moore searches every room, every corner, every hiding place the lighthouse might offer. He finds the men's personal belongings untouched, their pipes still on the mantelpiece, their books open to pages they will never finish reading, their oilskin coats hanging on pegs by the door. It is as if they have simply stepped out for a moment and will return at any second. But the most disturbing discovery is outside. The landing stage, where supply ships dock and where the keepers would normally work during daylight hours, shows signs of tremendous violence. Iron railings are twisted and bent, concrete steps are cracked, and heavy equipment has been tossed about like toys. The damage extends far above the normal reach of even the highest waves, suggesting forces that exceed anything in the recorded history of these waters. The investigation that follows brings experts from across Scotland and England. They examine every inch of the lighthouse, interview every person who might have information about the keeper's final days, and study weather records to understand what conditions the men might have faced. But the more they investigate, the deeper the mystery becomes. Weather stations across Scotland recorded the storm of December 15th as severe but not exceptional. Other lighthouses in the region reported difficult conditions, but nothing beyond the experience of seasoned keepers. The Flannan Isles, however, seem to have experienced something far more violent, a localized phenomenon that affected only that small cluster of rocks in the middle of the Atlantic. Dr. Robert Muirhead, sent by the Northern Lighthouse Board to investigate, compiled a detailed report that raised more questions than it answered. He noted that one of the keepers' oilskin coats was missing, suggesting that at least one man had gone outside during the storm. But why would experienced keepers venture out in conditions violent enough to damage concrete and iron? What could have compelled them to leave the safety of the lighthouse? The local population of the Outer Hebrides had their own explanations, rooted in generations of island folklore. They spoke of the Phantom of the Seven Hunters, a supernatural entity that was said to roam the Flannan Isles during severe storms. Fishermen reported seeing strange lights on the islands when no lighthouse keepers should have been outside, and some claimed to have heard voices calling across the water on calm nights, voices that seemed to come from the direction of Ely and Moore. But modern lighthouse technology offers a different perspective. Automated systems now monitor the Flannan Isles light, recording everything from weather conditions to equipment performance. These records show that the islands continue to experience unusually severe weather patterns, with wave heights and wind speeds that occasionally exceed all measurements from surrounding areas. The geography of the islands, scientists now understand, can create a focusing effect that concentrates storm energy in ways that weren't understood in 1900. Dr. Sarah MacLeod, a marine meteorologist at the University of Glasgow, has studied the Flannan Isles phenomenon for over a decade. Her research suggests that the unique positioning of the islands can create standing wave patterns during severe storms, waves that build upon each other until they reach heights that would be impossible in open water. These rogue waves could theoretically reach the lighthouse level, creating the damage observed after the keeper's disappearance. Yet even this scientific explanation fails to account for all the evidence. The missing oilskin coat suggests that the keepers were aware of danger and had time to prepare. Why didn't they leave more detailed records in the log? Why didn't they fire the emergency rockets that were standard equipment at every lighthouse? And most puzzling of all, why did all three men leave the lighthouse together, abandoning the cardinal rule of lighthouse keeping that at least one keeper must always remain with the light? Psychological analysis of the men's backgrounds reveals no factors that might explain a collective breakdown or decision to abandon their posts. All three were experienced keepers with excellent service records. They had weathered storms before, worked together harmoniously, and shown no signs of the isolation-induced stress that sometimes affected lighthouse crews. The mystery deepened in 1971 when renovation work on the lighthouse uncovered a hidden cache of documents that the keepers had apparently concealed shortly before their disappearance. These papers included what appeared to be rough drafts of log entries that were never transcribed into the official record. The handwriting showed increasing agitation and fear, with references to strange lights and sounds from the sea that grew more frequent as December 15th approached. Modern forensic analysis of these documents has confirmed their authenticity, but their content raises disturbing questions about the keepers' mental state in their final days. Were they experiencing shared hallucinations brought on by isolation and stress? Or were they recording genuine phenomena that science has yet to explain? The Flannan Isles lighthouse was finally automated in 1971, removing the last human presence from these remote rocks. But the automation has brought its own mysteries. Equipment malfunctions occur with unusual frequency, often during severe weather when the lighthouse is most needed. Radio communications with the mainland sometimes carry strange interference patterns that sound almost like voices, and satellite imagery occasionally shows lights on the islands when no human activity is scheduled. Local helicopter pilots who service the automated equipment report unsettling experiences during their visits. Some describe feeling watched while working on the lighthouse, even though they know they are alone on the island. Others have reported finding the lighthouse door standing open when they arrive, despite security protocols that should keep it sealed. Most disturbing of all, several pilots have reported seeing figures moving around the lighthouse gallery at night, figures that disappear when approached. The legend of the Flannan Isles keepers has become part of Scottish maritime folklore, inspiring songs, stories, and countless theories about what really happened on that December night in 1900. But perhaps the truth is simpler and more complex than any explanation we can devise. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, standing as monuments to the limits of human understanding and the enduring power of the sea to humble those who think they can master its moods. Ourang Medan, the ship of the damned. File classification, maritime mystery, unresolved. Case number 1947 SM001. Status, disputed evidence. In the treacherous waters of the Strait of Malacca, where the Indian Ocean meets the South China Sea, sailors have always spoken in hushed tones of ships that carry more than cargo, vessels cursed by their own secrets, condemned to sail the boundaries between the living world and something far darker. Among these legends, none inspires more terror than the tale of the Ourang Medan, a Dutch merchant vessel that allegedly became a floating tomb in 1947, her crew found dead with expressions of such pure horror that rescue workers fled rather than remain aboard. The story begins with supernatural dread that seems to emanate from the very name of the ship. Ourang Medan translates to Man of Medan in Malay, but local superstition gives it a more sinister meaning. The Ghost of the Strait, a vessel doomed to wander the shipping lanes as a warning to those who dare to transport forbidden cargo. According to the legend, the ship was engaged in illegal activities so heinous that they attracted the attention of forces beyond human understanding, transforming her into a floating monument to the consequences of human greed and ambition. The supernatural account tells of a vessel that appeared normal from a distance, but carried an aura of wrongness that could be felt by any sailor with experience in these waters. Ships that encountered her reported compasses spinning wildly, radios filled with static and voices speaking in unknown languages, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the Ourang Medan like heat from a fire. Crew members who caught sight of her described feeling watched by invisible eyes, and several ships reportedly changed course to avoid crossing her path, their captains unable to explain their sudden fear. Local maritime folklore speaks of the Ourang Medan as a ship that had violated the ancient laws of the sea, carrying cargo that was never meant to travel on water. Some versions of the legend claim she was transporting artifacts stolen from forgotten temples, objects that carried curses dating back to the earliest civilizations. Others whisper that her holds contained the results of experiments that no government would officially acknowledge, research into forces that mankind was never meant to understand. The crew's fate, according to the supernatural narrative, was sealed by their own greed and willingness to transport forbidden cargo. Death came to them not through disease or accident, but through their exposure to forces that human minds could not comprehend. Their faces, frozen in expressions of absolute terror, bore witness to sights that no living person should ever see, and their bodies remained untouched by the normal processes of decay, preserved by the same unnatural forces that had claimed their lives. But the maritime authorities approach such tales with skepticism and demand evidence. Let us examine the official record. The first documented report of the Ourang Medan incident appeared in various maritime publications in the late 1940s, describing a series of distress calls received by multiple ships in the Strait of Malacca in June 1947. The messages, transmitted in Morse code, allegedly came from a vessel identifying herself as the Ourang Medan. The content of these transmissions was deeply disturbing. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. This was followed by a series of increasingly frantic messages describing the crew's condition, before ending with the chilling final transmission, "I die," then silence. The Silver Star, an American merchant vessel, was reportedly the first to respond to these distress calls. According to the account, Captain William F. Davis located the Ourang Medan drifting in calm seas, showing no signs of damage or distress from external sources. When a boarding party was sent to investigate, they found the Dutch vessel exactly as described in the radio messages, the entire crew dead, their bodies scattered throughout the ship, each face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The boarding party's report, if it ever existed, described a scene that defied rational explanation. The crew had died suddenly and simultaneously, with no signs of violence, disease, or mechanical failure. The ship's dog was found dead in the same condition as the crew, and even the rats in the hold had perished, their tiny faces showing the same expression of terror. Most disturbing of all, the bodies showed no signs of decomposition despite the tropical heat, and the boarding party reported that the ship felt unnaturally cold throughout. The official account states that the Silver Star's crew attempted to tow the Ourang Medan to port, but before they could secure the tow line, the Dutch vessel caught fire and exploded with such violence that nothing remained but scattered debris. The Silver Star's crew barely escaped with their lives, and the Ourang Medan sank to the bottom of the strait, taking with her any physical evidence of what had occurred aboard. However, maritime investigators have found troubling inconsistencies in this account. The first problem is documentation. Despite the dramatic nature of the incident, no official records of the Ourang Medan can be found in Dutch shipping registers, Lloyd's of London insurance records, or any other maritime authority. The vessel simply does not appear to have existed according to official sources. Dr. Carroll A, a maritime historian specialising in post-war shipping records, has spent decades searching for evidence of the Ourang Medan's existence. Her research has uncovered no trace of a Dutch vessel by that name registered during the 1940s, no insurance claims related to such a loss, and no official reports from the Silver Star regarding the incident. The absence of documentation is particularly significant given the meticulous record-keeping required for international shipping during this period. The Silver Star herself presents another puzzle. While American merchant vessels named Silver Star did operate in the Pacific during the 1940s, none of their recorded positions placed them in the Strait of Malacca in June 1947. Ship movement records, maintained by both American and British colonial authorities, show no American vessel responding to distress calls in that area during the relevant time period. skeptics propose several rational explanations for the Ourang Medan legend. The most likely scenario involves the conflation of multiple real maritime incidents into a single dramatic story. The period immediately following World War II saw numerous shipping disasters in the Pacific, including several involving mysterious crew deaths that were later attributed to toxic cargo, gas leaks, or tropical diseases. Chemical engineers point to the possibility of toxic gas exposure as a rational explanation for the described symptoms. Hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, or other industrial gases could have caused rapid death with the facial expressions described in the legend. Many ships during this period carried inadequately documented chemical cargo, and leaks could have overcome the crew without leaving obvious traces. The post-war period also saw significant military activity in the region, including the disposal of chemical weapons and experimental materials. Could the Ourang Medan have been involved in transporting such materials, only to fall victim to her own cargo? The subsequent explosion and complete destruction of the vessel would be consistent with attempts to cover up such an incident. Psychological analysis suggests that the Ourang Medan story may have originated as a cautionary tale, created by sailors to warn against the dangers of transporting undocumented cargo. The maritime industry during the 1940s involved significant illegal activity, including arms smuggling, drug trafficking, and the transport of stolen goods. Such stories serve to reinforce the supernatural consequences of engaging in forbidden activities. Yet proponents of the supernatural explanation argue that the consistency of the account across multiple sources suggests a genuine incident rather than a fabricated story. The specific details, the radio messages, the crew's expressions, the ship's destruction, are too elaborate and consistent to be purely fictional. Maritime paranormal researchers point to similar incidents in the same region involving unexplained crew deaths and supernatural phenomena. The Strait of Malacca has a long history of maritime mysteries, including reports of ghost ships, mysterious lights, and vessels that appear and disappear without explanation. The geographic location, with its strong currents, frequent storms, and dense shipping traffic, creates conditions that some believe are conducive to supernatural activity. The timing of the Ourang Medan incident also coincides with increased military activity in the region, including nuclear testing and chemical weapons experiments. Some researchers suggest that exposure to radiation or experimental chemicals could have caused the described symptoms, while also creating electromagnetic anomalies that might explain the supernatural aspects of the story. Cryptozoologists have proposed that the crew may have encountered an unknown species of marine life capable of producing toxic gases or other harmful substances. The waters of Southeast Asia remain largely unexplored, and new species of dangerous marine life are discovered regularly. Could the Ourang Medan have encountered something that modern science has yet to identify? The intelligence community adds another layer of complexity to the mystery. The post-war period saw extensive covert operations throughout Southeast Asia, including the transport of experimental weapons and other classified materials. The Ourang Medan incident bears similarities to other cases where military authorities have used supernatural explanations to cover up classified operations that went wrong. Modern forensic analysis of the available evidence reveals significant problems with the official account. The described symptoms of the crew's deaths are inconsistent with known toxins, diseases, or other natural causes. The simultaneous death of all crew members, including the ship's animals, suggests a cause that affected the entire vessel instantaneously, a phenomenon that has no known scientific explanation. Satellite analysis of the Strait of Malacca's shipping traffic during the 1940s shows no evidence of the massive explosion described in the Ourang Medan account. Such an explosion would have been visible from considerable distances and would have been reported by multiple vessels. The absence of such reports raises questions about whether the incident occurred as described. The lack of physical evidence remains the most significant obstacle to resolving the Ourang Medan mystery. Despite the dramatic nature of the incident, no debris, personal effects, or other physical traces have ever been recovered. The strait's currents and depth make recovery of small items unlikely, but the complete absence of any physical evidence is unusual for such a significant maritime incident. Technological analysis of the radio transmissions described in the account reveals inconsistencies with 1940s communication equipment. The The clarity and range of the alleged messages exceed what would have been possible with typical merchant vessel radio equipment of that era. This suggests either that the technical details were added later, or that the equipment involved was more sophisticated than typically found on merchant ships. The psychological profile of the alleged crew members also raises questions. The Ourang Medan was supposedly a Dutch merchant vessel, but no Dutch sailors matching the descriptions of the crew have ever been identified as missing. The Dutch maritime authorities, despite extensive searches, have found no evidence of missing personnel that would correspond to the Ourang Medan incident. Cultural analysis of the legend reveals elements common to maritime folklore throughout Southeast Asia. The specific details of the crew's fate, the ship's destruction, and the supernatural elements all appear in various forms in traditional stories from the region. This suggests that the Ourang Medan legend may have incorporated existing cultural motifs, rather than describing a unique historical event. Carroll A. Deering, The Five-Masted Mystery. Case file, United States Coast Guard investigation, number 21001. Date, January 31, 1921. Location, Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Status, unsolved. Evidence secured. One five-masted commercial schooner abandoned and aground. Crew status, 11 men missing, presumed lost. Cause of abandonment, unknown. Additional notes. This case has baffled federal investigators for over a century and remains one of the most thoroughly documented yet unexplained maritime mysteries in American history. The Carroll A. Deering was not just any ship. She was a masterpiece of American shipbuilding, one of the largest commercial sailing vessels ever constructed. At 255 feet long with 5 towering masts, she represented the pinnacle of wind-powered cargo transport in an age when steam was rapidly replacing sail. Built in 1919 at the G.G. Deering Company shipyard in Bath, Maine, she was designed to carry heavy cargo across the world's oceans with a crew of just 11 men. Her maiden voyage had been flawless, establishing her reputation as both seaworthy and profitable. On August 20th, 1920, the Carroll A. Deering departed Norfolk, Virginia, bound for Rio de Janeiro with a cargo of coal. Captain William Merritt, a veteran mariner with decades of experience, commanded the vessel with a crew carefully selected for their expertise in handling such a large sailing ship. The voyage south was routine, the weather favourable, and all reports indicated normal operations as the ship crossed the Atlantic towards South America. The first documented evidence of trouble appears in the testimony of Captain S.E. Johnson of the steamship Hewitt. On January 23, 1921, while passing Cape Lookout, North Carolina, Johnson reported an unusual encounter with the Carroll A. Deering. According to his sworn statement to Coast Guard investigators, a man hailed him from the schooner's deck, shouting that the ship had lost both anchors and requesting that the Hewitt report this to the Coast Guard when she reached port. Johnson noted that the man who hailed him appeared to be speaking with a foreign accent and was not dressed in the uniform typical of a ship's officer. This encounter raises the first of many questions that would plague the investigation. Why would a ship's officer allow a crew member to handle such communication? Why was the Carroll A. Deering sailing so close to the dangerous waters off Cape Lookout if she had lost her anchors? And most puzzling of all, why did the crew member specifically mention only the lost anchors when subsequent investigation would reveal far more serious problems aboard the vessel? 8 days later, on January 31, 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was discovered hard aground on Diamond Shoals, one of the most treacherous stretches of water along the North Carolina coast. The ship was spotted by the crew of the Cape Hatteras life-saving station, who immediately recognized that something was seriously wrong. The massive schooner was positioned high on the shoals with all sails set, but no crew was visible on deck and no distress signals were being displayed. Coast Guard cutter Seminole was dispatched to investigate, but heavy seas prevented boarding for 5 days. During this period, observers noted that the ship appeared to be intact and showed no signs of battle damage or fire. Her sails were properly trimmed, suggesting competent seamanship right up to the moment of grounding. However, something was clearly amiss. No crew members could be seen, and the ship's lifeboats were missing from their davits. When boarding finally became possible on February 4th, the investigating team found a scene that defied easy explanation. The ship was completely abandoned, with no sign of the 11 crew members who should have been aboard. The captain's cabin had been ransacked, with navigation equipment, ship's papers, and personal belongings scattered throughout. The ship's log was missing, along with all navigational instruments, including the chronometer, sextant, and barometer, tools essential for ocean navigation. The galley showed signs of recent meal preparation, with pots on the stove and food in various stages of preparation, as if the cook had been interrupted mid-task. Personal belongings were found throughout the crew quarters, but many items of value were missing. The ship's cat was discovered alive and apparently well fed, suggesting that the abandonment had occurred relatively recently. Most significantly, both of the ship's lifeboats were gone, along with the gear typically stored with them. This indicated that the crew had not simply vanished, they had deliberately abandoned ship, taking with them the equipment necessary for survival at sea. But why would an experienced crew abandon a seaworthy vessel that showed no signs of serious damage? The cargo hold revealed another puzzle. The coal cargo remained largely intact and properly stowed, showing no signs of shifting that might have caused the ship to become unstable. There was no evidence of fire, explosion, or toxic gas that might have forced the crew to evacuate. The ship's pumps were functional, and while there was some water in the bilge, it was not enough to threaten the vessel's safety. Physical evidence from the scene painted a contradictory picture. The ship's steering gear had been damaged, with the wheel rigging cut or broken in a manner that suggested deliberate sabotage rather than storm damage. However, the damage was not severe enough to prevent the ship from being sailed, and emergency steering arrangements were readily available to any competent crew. The investigation expanded to include interviews with personnel at every port the Carroll A had visited during her voyage. Records from Rio de Janeiro showed that the ship had arrived safely and discharged her cargo without incident. However, Captain Merritt had become seriously ill during the stay and was hospitalized, requiring his replacement by Captain W.B. Wormel for the return voyage to New York. Captain Wormel's background became a focus of the investigation. He was an experienced mariner, but several crew members had expressed concerns about his leadership style and decision-making abilities during the voyage. First Mate Charles B. McClellan had reportedly clashed with Wormel over navigation decisions and crew management. These tensions were documented in reports from other ships that had encountered the Carroll A during her northward voyage. The crew roster presented its own mysteries. Several of the men were foreign nationals, including some whose backgrounds were difficult to verify. In the post-World War I era, concerns about foreign agents and revolutionary activity were widespread, leading investigators to consider whether the Carroll A might have been targeted for political reasons. Witness statements from ships that had sighted the Carroll A during her final voyage revealed disturbing inconsistencies. The steamship Lake Francis reported seeing the schooner on January 25th, sailing normally with full crew visible on deck. However, the cargo ship Cres reported a sighting 2 days later, where the Carroll A appeared to be sailing erratically, with only a few crew members visible and no response to signals. The weather records for the period show that the Carroll A would have encountered several severe storms during her northward voyage. The winter of 1920-21 was particularly harsh along the Atlantic coast, with numerous ships reporting extreme conditions. Could the crew have been overwhelmed by weather conditions and forced to abandon ship in their lifeboats? Maritime experts analysed the ship's final approach to Cape Hatteras and concluded that the grounding was not accidental. The Carroll A's position on Diamond Shoals indicated that she had been deliberately sailed onto the reef, possibly by someone unfamiliar with the local waters. This suggested that the original crew had already abandoned ship and that unknown individuals had attempted to sail her to safety before running aground. The missing lifeboats became a crucial element in the investigation. Coast Guard search operations covered hundreds of square miles of ocean, but no trace of the boats or their occupants was ever found. The winter storms that had battered the coast during this period would have made survival in small boats extremely difficult, but the complete absence of debris was unusual. Theories about the crew's fate multiplied as the investigation progressed. The mutiny theory gained support from evidence of tension between officers and crew, combined with the damage to the steering gear and the missing navigation equipment. Proponents argued that the crew had murdered the officers, looted the ship and escaped in the lifeboats with plans to start new lives elsewhere. The piracy theory suggested that the Carroll A had been attacked by criminals who killed or kidnapped the crew and attempted to sail the ship to a safe harbour where the cargo could be sold. The ransacked condition of the captain's cabin and the missing valuables supported this theory, as did reports of increased criminal activity along the shipping lanes during the Prohibition era. Foreign agents' theory proposed that the ship had been targeted because of strategic cargo, or because one or more crew members were involved in espionage activities. The post-war period saw significant concerns about communist and anarchist activities, and several crew members had backgrounds that raised questions about their loyalties. Natural disaster theorists argued that severe weather, possibly combined with cargo shifting or structural failure, had forced the crew to abandon ship. They pointed to the violent storms documented during the voyage and suggested that the crew's lifeboats had been overwhelmed by the same conditions that had damaged the ship. Supernatural explanations inevitably emerged, given the ship's location near the infamous Cape Hatteras, known to sailors as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Local folklore spoke of ghost ships, mysterious lights, and other phenomena that allegedly plagued vessels in these waters. Some theorists proposed that the crew had encountered something that drove them to abandon their ship in terror. The Coast Guard's official investigation, led by Captain J.H. Toome, interviewed hundreds of witnesses and examined thousands of documents over a period of months. Despite this exhaustive effort, investigators were unable to reach a definitive conclusion about what had happened to the Carroll A. Deering's crew. The case file grew to encompass everything from detailed technical analyses of the ship's condition to wild speculation about supernatural intervention. Federal involvement expanded the investigation beyond maritime authorities. The Department of Justice, concerned about possible criminal activity, assigned agents to investigate potential connections to organised crime or foreign espionage. The State Department examined whether international incidents might have played a role in the crew's disappearance. Physical evidence continued to surface sporadically over the following months. Bottles containing messages allegedly from the Carroll A. Deering's crew washed ashore along the North Carolina coast, but analysis proved them to be hoaxes. Personal effects claimed to belong to crew members were offered for sale by various individuals, but none could be authenticated. The ship herself was eventually refloated and towed to Norfolk, where she was sold for scrap. The process of dismantling the vessel revealed no additional clues about the crew's fate. Hidden compartments that might have contained contraband were not found, and no evidence of violence beyond the damaged steering gear was discovered. Modern analysis of the case using contemporary investigative techniques has failed to resolve the central questions. DNA analysis of biological material found aboard the ship proved inconclusive due to contamination and degradation. Computer modelling of weather conditions during the vessel's final voyage confirmed that survival in small boats would have been extremely difficult, but not impossible. The Carroll A. Deering case remains open in Coast Guard files, a testament to the sea's ability to swallow evidence as completely as it swallows ships, leaving behind only questions that grow more complex with each attempt to answer them. Vichimo, the ghost of the Arctic. The helicopter hovers over the endless expanse of Arctic ice, its rotors beating against air so cold it seems solid. Below, the pilot scans the white wilderness through polarized sunglasses, looking for something that might not even exist anymore. It's 2016, and this is the latest in a series of modern expeditions searching for one of the most famous ghost ships in maritime history, the Vichimo, a steel-hulled cargo vessel that has been wandering the Arctic Ocean unmanned for over 8 decades. The pilot's radio crackles with reports from Inuit hunters who claim they spotted her just weeks ago, trapped in pack ice near Banks Island, her hull still intact, her empty bridge windows staring out over the frozen wasteland, like the eyes of something that refuses to die. Dr. Sarah Chen, an Arctic researcher aboard the helicopter, checks her GPS coordinates against historical sighting reports that stretch back to the 1930s. She's part of a new generation of scientists who see the Vichimo not just as a curiosity, but as a unique opportunity to study how ships, ice, and time interact in one of Earth's most extreme environments. Climate change has made the Arctic more accessible than ever before, but it has also accelerated the forces that might finally claim the ghost ship that has defied destruction for longer than most vessels ever sail. The story begins in 1914, when the world was a very different place, and the Arctic represented the ultimate frontier for human ambition and commercial enterprise. The Hudson's Bay Company, one of the oldest and most powerful trading organizations in North America, commissioned the construction of a cargo steamer specifically designed for Arctic operations. The Vichimo was built in Sweden, constructed with a reinforced hull that could withstand ice pressure and equipped with engines powerful enough to push through frozen seas that would trap ordinary vessels. For 15 years, the Vichimo served as a lifeline between the outside world and the remote Arctic communities that depended on trade for survival. She carried supplies, mail, and manufactured goods north, returning south with furs, whale oil, and other products of the harsh northern economy. Her captain and crew became legendary figures in Arctic navigation, men who could read ice conditions like others read newspapers, who understood the rhythm of freeze and thaw that governed life in the polar regions. The ship's routine was as predictable as the Arctic seasons themselves. Each summer, when the ice broke up enough to allow navigation, the Vichimo would make her way north through the treacherous waters of the Northwest Passage, visiting isolated trading posts and Inuit communities scattered across thousands of miles of coastline. She would race against time and weather, loading and unloading cargo before the ice closed in again, trapping any vessel unlucky enough to be caught in the wrong place when winter returned. In 1929, the inevitable happened. The Vichimo was caught by an early freeze near the coast of Alaska, locked in ice that showed no sign of breaking up before the following spring. This was not an unusual situation. Arctic sailors expected to be trapped by ice periodically, and ships were provisioned and prepared for such emergencies. The crew settled in for a long winter, confident that they would resume their voyage when the ice released its grip. But 1929 was different. The ice that trapped the Vichimo was more extensive and persistent than anyone had seen in decades. Spring came and went without the usual breakup, and summer brought only partial melting that was insufficient to free the ship. The Hudson's Bay Company faced a difficult decision: continue to support a crew trapped indefinitely in the Arctic, or abandon the vessel and write off the substantial investment she represented. The company chose abandonment, but not without a fight. The crew was evacuated by aircraft, one of the first such operations in Arctic history, leaving behind a fully provisioned ship locked in ice that seemed permanent. Company officials expected the Vichimo to be crushed by ice pressure, or to sink when the ice eventually melted, ending her story as just another casualty of Arctic commerce. Instead, something extraordinary happened. In 1930, an Inuit hunter reported seeing the Vichimo sailing free in open water, apparently undamaged by her winter imprisonment. The sighting seemed impossible. Who was sailing the abandoned ship? How had she broken free from ice that had trapped her for months? The Hudson's Bay Company sent an expedition to investigate, and they found the Vichimo drifting unmanned but seaworthy, her cargo still secure in her holds. The company reclaimed their ship and attempted to return her to service, but the Arctic had other plans. Within months, the Vichimo was trapped in ice again, this time in a location even more remote and inaccessible than before. Once again, the company abandoned her, and once again she broke free on her own, beginning a pattern of entrapment and escape that would continue for decades. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, reports of Vichimo sightings came from across the Arctic. Inuit hunters, government surveyors, and other Arctic travellers regularly reported encounters with the unmanned vessel. Sometimes she was trapped in ice, sometimes sailing free in open water, but always she was alone, crewless, a ghost ship wandering the northern seas according to her own mysterious logic. The sightings followed a pattern that seemed to mirror the natural rhythms of the Arctic itself. The Vichimo appeared most often during the brief summer months when ice conditions allowed for navigation, as if she were still trying to complete the trading voyages that had been her purpose for 15 years. Witnesses described her as looking remarkably well preserved, her hull apparently undamaged by decades of ice and weather, her superstructure intact despite the harsh conditions. What made these sightings particularly intriguing was their consistency across multiple independent witnesses. Inuit hunters, who possessed intimate knowledge of Arctic conditions and shipping, described the same vessel appearing in the same general areas year after year. Government officials conducting surveys or scientific research provided detailed reports that corroborated the hunters' accounts. Even skeptical observers were forced to admit that something matching the Vichimo's description was regularly appearing in Arctic waters. The ship became part of Inuit folklore, taking on significance that extended far beyond her original commercial purpose. Elders told stories of the ghost ship that refused to die, interpreting her persistence as a sign of the changing relationship between traditional Arctic life and the modern world that was encroaching from the south. Some saw her as a guardian spirit, watching over the frozen seas that had been home to their ancestors for thousands of years. During World War II, the Vichimo's wanderings took on strategic significance. Military personnel stationed in the Arctic reported multiple sightings, and there were concerns that the unmanned vessel might interfere with shipping or military operations. Several attempts were made to locate and secure the ship, but she proved as elusive as ever, appearing and disappearing according to patterns that defied military planning. The most documented encounter occurred in 1969, when the Vichimo was spotted trapped in pack ice near Banks Island by a group of Inuit hunters. Unlike previous sightings, this encounter allowed for close inspection of the vessel. The hunters reported that the ship appeared to be in remarkably good condition, with her hull intact and her superstructure showing only normal signs of weathering. They were able to board the vessel and found her cargo holds still containing remnants of her original cargo, preserved by the Arctic cold. This 1969 sighting generated renewed interest in the Vichimo from both scientific and commercial perspectives. Salvage companies began planning expeditions to recover the vessel, recognizing that a ship preserved by Arctic conditions might have significant historical and monetary value. However, the harsh conditions and remote location made such operations extremely challenging and expensive. Modern technology has transformed the search for the Vichimo from a matter of chance encounters to systematic scientific investigation. Satellite imagery can now monitor vast areas of Arctic ice, and GPS tracking allows for precise documentation of sightings. Climate researchers studying Arctic ice conditions have incorporated Vichimo sightings into their data, using the ship's movements as an indicator of changing ice patterns and ocean currents. The most recent confirmed sighting occurred in 2016, when Inuit hunters photographed what appeared to be the Vichimo trapped in ice near the Alaskan coast. The images, while taken from a distance, showed a vessel matching the ship's known characteristics. However, attempts to reach the location were unsuccessful due to dangerous ice conditions, and subsequent satellite surveys of the area found no trace of the ship. Climate change has added urgency to the search for the Vichimo. As Arctic ice melts at unprecedented rates, the conditions that have preserved the ghost ship for 8 decades are rapidly changing. Scientists worry that rising temperatures and changing ice patterns might finally destroy the vessel, ending one of the longest-running maritime mysteries in history. The search has also revealed how the Vichimo's story has influenced Arctic policy and shipping regulations. Her decades of unmanned wandering highlighted the need for better tracking of abandoned vessels in Arctic waters, leading to international agreements on maritime safety and environmental protection. Modern Arctic shipping operations include protocols specifically designed to prevent the creation of new ghost ships like the Vichimo. Environmental researchers have found that the Vichimo's story provides unique insights into Arctic ocean currents and ice dynamics. By tracking her reported positions over decades, scientists have been able to map circulation patterns and ice drift that would have been impossible to document through conventional means. The ghost ship has become an inadvertent scientific instrument, providing data about one of Earth's least understood marine environments. The cultural impact of the Vichimo extends far beyond the Arctic. Her story has inspired countless books, documentaries, and fictional accounts, cementing her place in maritime folklore, alongside legendary ghost ships like the Flying Dutchman and the Mary Celeste. Unlike these mythical vessels, however, the Vichimo's existence is well documented, making her perhaps the only confirmed ghost ship in the world. Modern salvage technology has made recovery of the Vichimo theoretically possible, but practical and legal obstacles remain significant. International maritime law governing abandoned vessels in Arctic waters is complex, and the ship's historical significance has led to calls for her preservation rather than commercial exploitation. Several expeditions have been planned in recent years, but none have yet succeeded in locating and securing the elusive vessel. The Vichimo's influence can be seen in contemporary Arctic research and exploration. Modern icebreakers and research vessels operating in polar waters carry equipment and procedures developed specifically to avoid the fate of becoming another ghost ship. The lessons learned from her 8 decades of unmanned wandering have informed everything from ship design to emergency protocols for Arctic operations. Kaz II, the ghost yacht, the Australian sun beats down mercilessly on the Coral Sea, turning the water into a mirror of blinding silver that stretches endlessly toward the horizon. The gentle swells rock a sleek white catamaran as she drifts with the current, her twin hulls cutting silently through water, so clear you can see the sandy bottom 30 feet below. Her sails hang slack in the still air, and from a distance she looks like any other pleasure craft enjoying a peaceful day on the water. But something is terribly wrong. The deck chairs are empty, the cockpit deserted, and no human voice breaks the silence that hangs over the yacht like a shroud. This is the Kaz II on April 18, 2007, 3 days into what should have been a routine sailing trip along Queensland's coast. The 9.8-metre catamaran had departed Airlie Beach on April 15th with 3 experienced sailors aboard: Derek Batten, 56, his brother Peter Tunstead, 69, and their friend James Tunstead, 63. They were heading for Perth, a familiar journey they had made before, men who knew these waters and respected the sea's moods. The weather forecast had been favourable, the boat was well equipped and seaworthy, and all 3 men were competent sailors with decades of experience between them. Derek Batten sits in the pilot's seat, checking the GPS and scanning the horizon through polarised sunglasses. The morning has been perfect for sailing. Gentle winds, calm seas, and visibility that extends for miles in every direction. Behind him, Peter works with the fishing lines, hoping to catch their lunch from the abundant waters of the Great Barrier Reef region. James is below deck, preparing coffee and checking the weather radio for any updates on conditions ahead. The 3 men are comfortable with each other and with their boat. They've spent countless hours aboard the Kaz II, maintaining her systems, upgrading her equipment, and learning every quirk of her handling in various conditions. This isn't their first long-distance cruise, and they approach the voyage with the casual confidence of experienced sailors who have weathered rough seas and navigated challenging passages. The conversation flows easily between them as they discuss their route, the weather patterns they expect to encounter, and the various stops they plan to make along the way. These are men who have known each other for years, who share a love of sailing and the independence it represents. The Kaz II is more than just a boat to them. She's a gateway to adventure, a means of exploring the vast coastline of Australia at their own pace and on their own terms. Derek makes an entry in the ship's log, noting their position and the favourable conditions. His handwriting is neat and methodical, recording wind speed, heading, and the time of the last GPS fix. It's a routine he's followed for years, the careful documentation that marks the difference between casual sailors and serious cruisers. The entry would later be found exactly as he wrote it, the last record of 3 men who seem to have simply vanished from the face of the earth. The morning progresses normally as the Kaz II makes good time along the Queensland coast. The autopilot is engaged, maintaining their course while the crew relaxes and enjoys the peaceful conditions. From time to time, one of them adjusts a sail or checks their position, but mostly they simply enjoy being on the water, away from the pressures and complications of life ashore. Peter mentions seeing dolphins in the distance, their distinctive fins cutting through the water as they play in the boat's wake. James emerges from below with coffee and sandwiches, settling into the cockpit to share the simple pleasure of a meal at sea. These are the moments that sailors treasure, the combination of motion and stillness, adventure and peace that can only be found on the open water. But somewhere in the hours that follow, something goes catastrophically wrong. The exact moment when routine becomes catastrophe is lost to us, swallowed by the sea along with whatever happened to the 3 men aboard. The Kaz II continues on her course, her autopilot faithfully maintaining the heading that Derek programmed that morning, but the men who should be guiding her journey have vanished without explanation. The first sign that something is amiss comes on April 18th, when the yacht is spotted by a helicopter crew conducting a routine coastal patrol. From the air, the Kaz II appears to be sailing normally, but something about her behaviour catches the pilot's attention. She's travelling in a straight line with mechanical precision, showing none of the small course corrections that mark the presence of human crew. Her sails are set but not trimmed for maximum efficiency, and no one can be seen moving about her deck. The helicopter pilot radios his observations to the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, reporting a vessel that appears to be sailing unmanned. This triggers a search and rescue response, with patrol boats dispatched to intercept the Kaz II and determine the status of her crew. The response is swift and professional, but it comes too late to help whatever emergency has already occurred aboard the drifting yacht. When rescue crews finally board the Kaz II, they find a scene that defies easy explanation. The yacht is in excellent condition, her system functioning normally and her safety equipment untouched. The table in the main cabin is set for a meal that was never eaten, with place settings still arranged exactly as they were left. A laptop computer sits open on the navigation table, displaying weather information that was last updated days earlier. Personal belongings are scattered throughout the cabin, but not in the chaotic manner that would suggest a struggle or emergency. Rather, they appear to have been left casually, as if their owners expected to return at any moment. Wallets, keys, and cell phones remain aboard, along with the kind of small personal items that people never willingly leave behind. The yacht's safety equipment tells its own puzzling story. The life raft remains secured in its position, showing no signs of deployment or preparation for use. Emergency flares are untouched in their storage compartments, and the emergency position indicating radio beacon, EPIRB, that should have been activated in any genuine emergency remains in its bracket, never switched on. Most puzzling of all is the condition of the yacht's foul weather gear. All three men's life jackets remain hanging in the cabin where they were stowed, despite maritime safety regulations requiring their use during any emergency. Their foul weather clothing is neatly arranged in lockers, showing no signs of hasty preparation for abandoning ship. The search for the missing men expands to cover hundreds of square miles of ocean, with aircraft, patrol boats, and volunteer vessels combing the waters where they might have been lost. The search continues for days, extended far beyond the normal duration due to the mysterious circumstances of the disappearance. But no trace of Derek Batten, Peter Tunstead, or James Tunstead is ever found. The official investigation that follows is thorough and methodical, examining every aspect of the yacht's condition and the circumstances of the men's disappearance. Marine accident investigators tear apart every system aboard the Kaz II, looking for mechanical failures, structural problems, or any other physical evidence that might explain what happened to her crew. Maritime safety expert Commander James Morrison leads the investigation team that boards the Kaz II. His decades of experience with marine accidents have prepared him for many scenarios, but the condition of the yacht presents puzzles he's never encountered before. The boat was in perfect condition, he later reports to investigators. Everything was functioning normally, the engine was in good order, and there were no signs of distress, damage, or emergency. The weather records for the period show conditions that were well within the capability of both the yacht and her experienced crew. No sudden storms, dangerous seas, or other meteorological phenomena occurred that might have created an emergency situation. The Kaz II had sailed through conditions that thousands of other vessels navigated safely during the same period. Psychological profiles of the three missing men reveal no factors that might explain a deliberate abandonment of their yacht. All three were experienced sailors with strong safety records and no history of risky behaviour. Their families described them as responsible, careful men who would never have taken unnecessary chances with their own safety or that of their companions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a maritime psychologist who specialises in sailing accidents, offers one possible explanation for the disappearance. Sudden medical emergencies can sometimes affect multiple people simultaneously, she suggests. If one crew member suffered a heart attack or other medical crisis, the others might have been so focused on helping him that they all ended up in the water without proper safety precautions. However, this theory fails to explain why no distress call was made and why none of the yacht's safety equipment was deployed. Modern sailing yachts are equipped with multiple communication systems that can summon help even in emergency situations, yet none of these systems show any evidence of use during the Kaz II's final voyage. Marine engineer Dr. Peter Harrison examines the yacht's autopilot system and confirms that it was functioning perfectly when the vessel was found. The autopilot would have maintained course indefinitely, he explains, but it requires manual intervention to avoid obstacles or respond to changing conditions. The fact that the boat was found sailing in open water suggests that she hadn't encountered any navigational hazards after the crew disappeared. The absence of any physical evidence from the missing men presents investigators with their greatest challenge. In most maritime accidents, some trace of the victims is eventually recovered: clothing, personal effects, or other items that provide clues about what happened. The complete absence of such evidence in the Kaz II case suggests either that the men were lost in deep water far from where they were eventually found, or that their disappearance occurred under circumstances that prevented any debris from entering the water. Oceanographic analysis of currents and wind patterns in the area provides some insight into the yacht's drift pattern after her crew disappeared. Computer modelling suggests that the Kaz II could have travelled considerable distances while under autopilot control, potentially carrying her far from the site where her crew was actually lost. This makes the search area effectively unlimited, and explains why no trace of the men was ever found. The coroner's inquest into the disappearance examines dozens of possible explanations, from equipment failure to criminal activity to supernatural intervention. Expert witnesses testify about everything from the yacht's seaworthiness to the psychological stress factors that might affect sailors on long voyages. However, the inquest ultimately concludes that the cause of the crew's disappearance cannot be determined from the available evidence. Local sailing communities have their own theories about what happened to the Kaz II's crew. Some point to the area's reputation for sudden weather changes that can catch even experienced sailors off guard. Others suggest that wildlife encounters, with sharks, jellyfish, or other marine creatures, might have created a situation where all three men ended up in the water simultaneously. The impact of the Kaz II incident extends beyond the immediate tragedy of 3 lives lost. The case has influenced maritime safety regulations, leading to improved requirements for emergency beacons and communication equipment on recreational vessels. Sailing organisations now use the disappearance as a case study in the importance of safety procedures and the dangers of complacency, even among experienced sailors. Modern technology has been applied to re-examine the case, with investigators using advanced forensic techniques to analyse evidence from the yacht. However, the passage of time and the harsh marine environment have degraded much of the physical evidence, making it unlikely that new analysis will provide definitive answers about what happened during those missing hours. The Kaz II herself was eventually sold and returned to service under a new name, but her reputation as a ghost yacht has followed her through subsequent owners. Some sailors report feeling uncomfortable aboard her, while others dismiss such concerns as superstition. The yacht continues to sail Australian waters, a reminder that some mysteries resist explanation even when they occur in the full light of the modern world, witnessed by satellites and monitored by technology, yet still capable of swallowing 3 lives without leaving so much as a ripple to mark their passing. Ellen Austin, the vanishing crew. The year is 2019 and Captain Maria Santos stares at her radar screen aboard the modern cargo vessel Atlantic Pioneer, her eyes fixed on a blip that shouldn't be there. 40 miles southeast of Bermuda, in waters that should contain nothing but empty ocean, her instruments are detecting a vessel approximately 200 feet in length, drifting without power or navigation lights. The ship appears to be adrift, possibly in distress, but when Santos attempts radio contact, she receives only silence. Her crew prepares to investigate what they assume is a routine maritime emergency, unaware that they are about to encounter a mystery that echoes one of the strangest incidents in maritime history, the case of the Ellen Austin and her cursed prize, a ghost ship that has been vanishing and reappearing in these same waters for nearly 150 years. As the Atlantic Pioneer approaches the mystery vessel, Santos notices something that chills her blood. The ship is clearly old, possibly a century or more, with lines and rigging that belong to a bygone era of sailing. Yet she appears to be in remarkably good condition, her hull intact and her superstructure showing only the kind of weathering that comes from decades, rather than generations at sea. Most disturbing of all, there is no sign of any crew, yet the ship shows every indication of being recently sailed. Her rigging is properly set, her deck appears clean and maintained, and smoke seems to rise from her galley chimney. This modern encounter joins a growing file of similar incidents that have occurred in the Sargasso Sea region, all bearing striking similarities to the original Ellen Austin case of 1881. Maritime historians and paranormal researchers have documented dozens of such sightings over the past century and a half, creating a pattern that suggests either a remarkable series of coincidences or something far more mysterious at work in these waters. The story begins in 1881 with the British cargo ship Ellen Austin, commanded by Captain A.J. Griffin, a veteran mariner with an impeccable reputation for both seamanship and honesty. The Ellen Austin was making a routine crossing from London to New York when she encountered an unnamed schooner drifting in the Sargasso Sea, that vast region of the North Atlantic known for its floating seaweed and unpredictable currents. The derelict vessel appeared to be in good condition but showed no signs of life, prompting Griffin to investigate what he assumed would be a standard salvage operation. Captain Griffin's logbook, preserved in maritime archives, describes the mystery ship as a fine vessel of approximately 120 feet, well maintained and seaworthy, but completely abandoned. His crew boarded the derelict and found her cargo intact, her navigation equipment in good order, and her provisions fresh enough to suggest that her crew had vanished only recently. Most puzzling of all, there was no evidence of violence, storm damage, or any other factor that might explain why her crew would abandon a perfectly serviceable ship in the middle of the ocean. Griffin made the logical decision to claim the vessel as salvage, placing a prize crew aboard to sail her to New York alongside the Ellen Austin. The two ships sailed in convoy for several days without incident, but then a fog bank rolled in, separating the vessels and reducing visibility to nearly zero. When the fog cleared, the mystery ship had vanished, taking Griffin's prize crew with her. Despite extensive searching, no trace of either the ship or the men could be found. The incident should have ended there, filed away as one of many maritime tragedies that occur in the vast expanse of the ocean. But according to Griffin's increasingly disturbed log entries, the story was far from over. 2 days after losing his prize crew, the Ellen Austin encountered the same mystery ship again, once more drifting unmanned in the same general area where she had first been found. Griffin's men searched the vessel thoroughly, but found no trace of the prize crew they had placed aboard her just days earlier. Despite the ominous implications, Griffin decided to place a second prize crew aboard the mystery ship, this time with explicit instructions to maintain visual contact with the Ellen Austin at all costs. The two vessels again sailed in convoy, but history repeated itself with terrifying precision. Another fog bank appeared, the ships were separated, and when visibility returned, both the mystery ship and Griffin's second prize crew had vanished without a trace. Captain Griffin's final log entries reveal a man struggling to comprehend something beyond his experience. He writes of dreams filled with the faces of his lost crew members, of whispered voices calling from empty water, and of a growing conviction that he had encountered something that existed outside the normal laws of nature. The Ellen Austin completed her voyage to New York, but Griffin never commanded another vessel, retiring from the sea with his health and sanity reportedly damaged by his encounter with the cursed ship. The Ellen Austin incident quickly became part of maritime folklore, but its influence extended far beyond sailors' stories told in waterfront taverns. The case helped establish legal precedents for salvage rights in international waters, particularly regarding vessels of unknown origin or registry. Maritime lawyers studied Griffin's detailed documentation to understand the complex legal issues surrounding abandoned ships and the responsibilities of those who encounter them. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a maritime historian at the University of Miami, has spent decades studying the Ellen Austin case and its impact on modern shipping practices. Griffin's experience highlighted the dangers of placing crews aboard unknown vessels, she explains. Modern salvage operations now include comprehensive safety protocols specifically designed to prevent the kind of losses that Griffin experienced. Every major shipping company has procedures that can be traced back to lessons learned from cases like the Ellen Austin. The story's influence on popular culture has been equally profound. Authors from the Victorian era to the present day have drawn inspiration from the Ellen Austin mystery, using it as the basis for countless novels, short stories, and film scripts. The image of a ghost ship that eternally claims the crews of those who try to sail her has become a recurring theme in maritime fiction, influencing everything from classic sea stories to modern horror films. Charles Fort, the early 20th century writer, who specialised in documenting anomalous phenomena, included the Ellen Austin case in his influential book The Book of the Damned, introducing the story to a new generation of researchers interested in unexplained events. Fort's work helped establish the Ellen Austin as one of the classic unsolved mysteries of the sea, alongside cases like the Mary Celeste and the Flying Dutchman. The case has also attracted the attention of paranormal researchers and conspiracy theorists, who see in Griffin's experience evidence of supernatural forces or extraterrestrial intervention. The Bermuda Triangle phenomenon, popularized in the 1970s, frequently cites the Ellen Austin incident as one of its foundational cases, suggesting that the mystery ship was part of a pattern of unexplained disappearances in the region. Modern oceanographic research has provided new insights into the conditions that might have contributed to the Ellen and the Austin mystery. The Sargasso Sea is now known to be a region of complex currents and unusual meteorological phenomena that can create navigation hazards unknown to 19th century sailors. Temperature inversions in the atmosphere can create superior mirages that make distant objects appear as solid vessels, while the sea's unique characteristics can cause ships to drift in unpredictable patterns. Dr. James Patterson, an oceanographer at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, has studied the Sargasso Sea for over 20 years. The region where the Ellen Austin incident occurred is characterized by converging currents that can trap floating objects for extended periods, he notes. A derelict vessel could potentially drift in circles for months or even years, appearing and disappearing from the same general area as currents and weather patterns change. However, this scientific explanation fails to account for the most disturbing aspects of Griffin's report: the repeated loss of prize crews and the apparent good condition of a ship that should have shown signs of prolonged abandonment. These elements of the story continue to puzzle researchers and have led to increasingly sophisticated attempts to explain what Griffin might have experienced. Psychological analysis of Griffin's account has revealed patterns consistent with extreme stress and possible hallucination brought on by the responsibility of command and the guilt of losing crew members. Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in maritime psychology, suggests that Griffin may have experienced a form of dissociative episode that caused him to perceive the same abandoned vessel as the mysterious ship that claimed his crews. The psychological pressure of losing men under his command could have caused Griffin to construct an elaborate fantasy that absolved him of responsibility, Chen explains. The supernatural elements of his story may have been his mind's way of coping with a series of tragic but explainable maritime accidents. Yet this explanation struggles to account for the corroborating testimony of Griffin's surviving crew members, many of whom provided independent accounts that supported their captain's version of events. These men had no apparent motive to participate in an elaborate deception, and their descriptions of the mystery ship remained consistent across multiple interviews conducted by shipping company officials and insurance investigators. The advent of satellite technology and global positioning systems has revolutionized the search for vessels like the Ellen Austin's mystery ship. Modern salvage companies now use advanced sonar and underwater vehicles to locate and investigate derelict vessels, often finding ships that have been drifting unmanned for decades. However, none of these technological marvels has succeeded in solving the central puzzle of the Ellen Austin case. In 2018, the research vessel Deep Explorer used state-of-the-art sonar to map the seafloor in the area where Griffin reported his encounters with the mystery ship. The survey revealed several unidentified wrecks, including one that appeared to match the dimensions of the vessel described in Griffin's logs. However, when divers investigated the wreck, they found a ship that had clearly been on the bottom for far longer than the 137 years since Griffin's encounter. The Ellen Austin case has influenced modern maritime law in ways that extend far beyond salvage rights. International agreements on search and rescue operations now include specific protocols for handling vessels of unknown origin, partly in response to historical cases where well-meaning rescuers became victims themselves. The International Maritime Organization has developed comprehensive guidelines for approaching and boarding derelict vessels, procedures that directly reflect lessons learned from incidents like the Ellen Austin. Contemporary shipping companies maintain databases of known derelict vessels, using satellite tracking and international reporting systems to monitor abandoned ships that pose navigation hazards. This modern approach to maritime safety represents a direct evolution from the ad hoc salvage practices of Griffin's era, when encountering an abandoned vessel was treated as an opportunity rather than a potential threat. The story's influence on marine insurance practices has been equally significant. Modern policies include specific clauses covering the loss of crews placed aboard salvaged vessels, protections that didn't exist in Griffin's time. Insurance investigators still study the Ellen Austin case as an example of the complex liability issues that can arise when salvage operations go wrong. Recent advances in underwater archaeology have provided new tools for investigating historical maritime mysteries, but the Ellen Austin case remains frustratingly resistant to resolution. The same deep-sea technology that has located and explored famous wrecks like the Titanic and the Bismarck has been applied to the Sargasso Sea region, Yet no trace of Griffin's mystery ship has ever been definitively identified. Dr. Robert Ballard, the oceanographer who discovered the Titanic, has expressed interest in the Ellen Austin case, but acknowledges the challenges it presents. The deep ocean preserves shipwrecks remarkably well, he notes, but finding a specific vessel in the vast expanse of the Sargasso Sea would be like looking for a particular grain of sand on a beach. Without more precise location data, even our most advanced technology can't guarantee success. The case continues to influence modern maritime fiction, with contemporary authors finding new ways to explore the themes of isolation, responsibility, and the supernatural that Griffin's experience brought to light. Recent novels and films have updated the Ellen Austin story for modern audiences, replacing 19th-century sailing ships with contemporary vessels while maintaining the core mystery of crews that vanish without explanation. Sable Island, the graveyard of the Atlantic. The helicopter circles Sable Island at 500 feet, its rotors cutting through the salt-laden air above what may be the most dangerous piece of land on Earth. Below, a crescent of sand stretches 25 miles across the North Atlantic, seemingly peaceful in the afternoon sun, its beaches dotted with seals and wild horses that have somehow survived generations of isolation. But this deceptive tranquility masks a darker truth. These shifting sands have claimed over 350 ships and thousands of lives, earning Sable Island the grim title of Graveyard of the Atlantic. Dr. Sarah MacDonald, a marine archaeologist aboard the helicopter, scans the shoreline through binoculars, looking for evidence of the island's latest mystery, the whistling buoy that should not exist. Case file, Maritime Anomaly Investigation 2019 SE 001. Location, Sable Island, Nova Scotia. Status, active investigation. The Canadian Coast Guard has received 17 separate reports in the past 6 months of a distinctive whistling sound emanating from waters around Sable Island, always during periods of heavy fog or severe weather. The sound has been described as mechanical in nature, resembling a ship's whistle or fog signal, but no vessel or navigation aid in the area should be producing such a sound. Weather buoys and navigation equipment have been checked and found to be functioning normally, yet the mysterious whistling continues to occur with disturbing regularity. Dr. MacDonald's investigation has uncovered historical records suggesting that similar sounds have been reported around Sable Island for over a century, always coinciding with periods of maritime distress or disaster. The phenomenon appears to be linked to the island's deadly reputation, as if the accumulated tragedy of centuries of shipwrecks has somehow imprinted itself on the very air and water surrounding this isolated outpost of sand and sorrow. The story of Sable Island's deadly legacy begins in the 16th century, when European explorers first encountered this treacherous obstacle lying directly across the major shipping routes between North America and Europe. The island's name comes from the French word for sand, an appropriate designation for a landmass that is constantly shifting and changing shape, moved by powerful currents and relentless storms that have made accurate navigation nearly impossible for centuries. It was the morning of November 15, 1760, when Captain James Morrison of the British merchant vessel Pembroke first spotted what he thought was a low-lying cloud bank on the horizon. Morrison was an experienced navigator, having crossed the Atlantic dozens of times, but the waters around Sable Island were notorious for their shifting currents and unpredictable weather patterns. As the Pembroke drew closer, Morrison realized his mistake. What he had taken for clouds was actually the sandy shore of Sable Island, and his ship was being driven toward it by a combination of wind and current that made escape impossible. The Pembroke's crew fought desperately to change course, working the sails and rudder with the skill that had carried them safely across thousands of miles of ocean. But Sable Island seemed to exert its own gravitational pull, drawing ships toward its shores with a force that defied both seamanship and common sense. Morrison watched in horror as his ship was driven inexorably toward the surf-pounded beaches where so many vessels had met their doom. The impact, when it came, was less violent than Morrison had expected, but no less final. The Pembroke struck the sandy bottom with a grinding sound that seemed to go on forever, her hull settling into the soft seabed that would become her permanent grave. Water began pouring through her damaged planks, and Morrison knew that his ship was lost. But unlike many captains who had faced similar fates on Sable Island, Morrison and most of his crew would survive to tell their tale. the rescue came from an unexpected source: the island's small community of lifesavers, men who had dedicated their lives to watching for ships in distress and helping survivors reach safety. These heroic individuals lived in primitive conditions on the windswept island, maintaining a constant vigil for vessels that might be driven onto the deadly shores. When they spotted the Pembroke's distress signals, they launched their small boats into the treacherous surf, risking their own lives to save Morrison and his crew. Morrison's account of his time on Sable Island, documented in his ship's log and later testimony to maritime authorities, provides one of the most detailed descriptions of the island's strange properties. He wrote of sounds that seemed to come from nowhere, voices calling from empty water, the creaking of ships that could not be seen, and a persistent whistling that rose and fell with the wind. Most disturbing of all, Morrison claimed to have seen the ghostly outlines of other vessels sailing just beyond the surf, ships that appeared solid from a distance but vanished when approached. The investigation into the Pembroke incident revealed patterns that had been repeated countless times in the waters around Sable Island. Ships would approach the area in clear weather and favourable conditions, only to find themselves suddenly engulfed in fog, battered by unexpected storms, or confused by compass readings that made no sense. Experienced navigators would make basic errors that they had never made before, as if some force was interfering with their judgment and seamanship. Official maritime records from the 18th and 19th centuries document a staggering number of ships lost in the vicinity of Sable Island, but the true toll may be even higher. Many vessels simply disappeared in the area without leaving any survivors to report their fate, adding to the island's reputation as a place where ships and crews could vanish without explanation. The British Admiralty, responding to the mounting losses, established a series of lighthouses and rescue stations on Sable Island, staffed by volunteers who were willing to endure the island's harsh conditions in order to save lives. These men reported experiences that seemed to confirm the supernatural nature of the island's deadly influence. They described ships that appeared on the horizon during storms, only to vanish when rescue boats were launched. They told of voices calling for help from empty water, and of lights that moved through the fog in patterns that suggested vessels in distress. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a historian specialising in 19th century maritime disasters, has studied the Sable Island phenomenon for over 20 years. Her research has uncovered patterns in the disaster reports that suggest more than simple navigational hazards at work. The number of experienced captains who made fatal errors near Sable Island is statistically impossible, she notes. These were men who had navigated safely for decades, yet they would suddenly make mistakes that no competent sailor should make. The island's shifting geography adds another layer of complexity to the mystery. Unlike fixed land masses, Sable Island is constantly changing shape and position, moved by powerful ocean currents and storms. Charts drawn in one decade could be dangerously inaccurate by the next, leading to navigation errors that place ships in danger before their crews realize the threat. However, this explanation fails to account for the most mysterious aspects of the island's reputation. Modern oceanographic analysis has revealed that Sable Island sits at the intersection of several major ocean currents, creating conditions that can produce unusual weather patterns and navigation hazards. The Labrador Current, carrying cold water south from the Arctic, meets the warm Gulf Stream in the waters around the island, creating fog banks, unexpected storms, and temperature inversions that can confuse both electronic and traditional navigation equipment. Dr. Michael Torres, an oceanographer who has studied the Sable Island region extensively, explains the scientific basis for many of the phenomena reported by ships in the area. The current interactions create what we call a maritime perfect storm, he notes. Temperature differentials can produce acoustic mirages that make sounds appear to come from impossible directions. Electromagnetic anomalies can interfere with compass readings and radio communications. Even experienced sailors can be completely disoriented by these conditions. Yet scientific analysis struggles to explain the most disturbing aspects of the Sable Island mystery. The consistency of reports across different time periods and weather conditions suggests phenomena that transcend simple meteorological explanations. The whistling sounds, in particular, have been documented by dozens of independent witnesses over more than a century, always described in remarkably similar terms. Acoustic analysis of recordings made near Sable Island has identified sounds that don't match any known natural or artificial sources. The whistling appears to be mechanical in nature, resembling the fog signals used by ships or lighthouses, but no equipment in the area should be producing such sounds. The phenomenon occurs most frequently during periods of poor visibility, when ships would be most vulnerable to navigation hazards. Psychological investigation has revealed that many survivors of Sable Island incidents report persistent auditory and visual hallucinations years after their experiences. Dr. Margaret Chen, specialist in trauma psychology, has studied dozens of survivors and found common patterns that suggest the island's environment has profound effects on human perception and mental state. The combination of isolation, danger, and sensory deprivation creates conditions that can trigger hallucinations and false memories, Dr. Chen explains. However, the consistency of reports across different individuals and time periods suggests that something more than simple psychological stress may be involved. The supernatural explanation for Sable Island's deadly reputation has deep roots in maritime folklore. Local legends speak of the island as a gathering place for the spirits of drowned sailors, souls trapped between the world of the living and the depths of the ocean. According to these stories, the whistling sounds are the voices of the dead, calling out warnings to ships approaching the deadly shores. Paranormal researchers have documented numerous reports of ghostly sightings on and around Sable Island. Lighthouse keepers, rescue workers, and scientific researchers have all reported encounters with figures that appear to be shipwreck survivors, only to vanish when approached. Some witnesses describe seeing entire crews of ghostly sailors working to save ships that are not there, as if the island retains the memory of every rescue attempt ever made. The intelligence community has also taken interest in the Sable Island mystery, particularly during periods of military tension when the island's strategic location made it important for national security. Classified documents released under Freedom of Information requests reveal that military personnel stationed on the island during World War II reported phenomena that could not be explained by conventional means. These military reports describe radar contacts that appeared and disappeared without explanation, radio transmissions in languages that could not be identified, and equipment malfunctions that occurred with unusual frequency. Some reports suggest that the island's unusual properties may have been investigated as potential weapons applications, though the results of such research remain classified. Modern technology has provided new tools for investigating the Sable Island mystery, but it has also revealed new puzzles. Satellite imagery shows that the island continues to change shape and position, sometimes in ways that appear to violate known principles of geological movement. GPS readings taken on the island show variations that cannot be explained by equipment error or atmospheric interference. Underwater surveys around Sable Island have located dozens of shipwrecks, creating an underwater museum of maritime disaster that spans 4 centuries. However, some of these wrecks appear to be in positions that don't match historical records of where ships were lost, as if the island's shifting sands have somehow rearranged the evidence of its deadly history. The most recent investigations have focused on the electromagnetic properties of the sand and water around Sable Island. Researchers have discovered unusual mineral compositions that could potentially interfere with navigation equipment, but the concentrations are not high enough to explain the dramatic effects reported by ships in the area. As research continues into the 21st century, Sable Island remains one of the most dangerous places on Earth for shipping, despite modern navigation technology and safety equipment. Ships still run aground on its shifting shores, and rescue workers still report experiences that seem to transcend rational explanation, suggesting that some mysteries are too deeply rooted in the intersection of geography, history, and human psychology to yield to purely scientific investigation. Flight 19, The Lost Squadron. Case File, United States Navy Investigation 1945 FL019. Classification, Unresolved. Date, December 5th, 1945. Aircraft, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. Personnel, 14 Navy airmen. Last known position, approximately 225 miles northeast of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Status, missing, presumed lost. Additional incidents, Martin PBM. Mariner rescue aircraft also disappeared during search operations. Total personnel lost, 27. This case remains one of the most thoroughly documented yet unexplained aviation disasters in US military history, spawning decades of investigation, speculation, and an entirely new category of unexplained phenomena. but the mystery of Flight 19 continues to echo through time in ways that its original investigators could never have imagined. Just last month, October 2023, another group of military aircraft experienced navigation failures in the exact same region where Flight 19 vanished 78 years ago. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets conducting routine training exercises reported simultaneous compass malfunctions, radio interference, and GPS anomalies that forced them to abort their mission and return to base under emergency protocols. The pilots, all experienced aviators with thousands of flight hours, described conditions identical to those reported by Flight 19's final radio transmissions. Compasses spinning wildly, landmarks that appeared to be in the wrong locations, and an overwhelming sense that they were flying over terrain that should not exist. Flight 19's influence on aviation safety, popular culture, and our understanding of navigation anomalies has been profound and far-reaching. The case became the foundation stone of what would later be known as the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon, transforming a single tragic training accident into a symbol of the ocean's enduring mysteries. Modern search and rescue protocols, military training procedures, and even civilian aviation regulations all bear the fingerprints of lessons learned from the loss of Flight 19 and the failures of the massive search operation that followed. The story begins on December 5th, 1945, at the Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, where 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers were preparing for a routine navigation training flight designated as Training Flight 19. The mission was simple and familiar. Fly east over the Bahamas, practice bombing runs at Hens and Chicken Shoals, then return to base via a prescribed route that would test the student pilot's dead reckoning navigation skills. It was the kind of training flight that had been conducted hundreds of times before without incident. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, the flight instructor, was an experienced pilot with over 2,500 flight hours, including combat experience in the Pacific Theatre. His students were competent aviators who had successfully completed similar training missions. The weather forecast showed generally favourable conditions, with some scattered thunderstorms, typical for the Florida region in December. The aircraft were well-maintained TBM Avengers, robust planes with excellent safety records and long-range capability. The first phase of the mission proceeded normally. Flight 19 departed Fort Lauderdale at 2:10 p.m, flew east as planned, and completed their bombing practice without incident. Radio transmissions during this phase were routine and professional, showing no signs of the confusion and panic that would soon follow. The aircraft were performing well, visibility was good, and all navigation equipment appeared to be functioning normally. At approximately 3:45 p.m, the first signs of trouble appeared in radio transmissions from Flight 19. Lieutenant Taylor's voice, normally calm and professional, carried an undertone of confusion as he reported to the Naval Air Station that both of his compasses were malfunctioning. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Compass failures could occur due to electrical problems or magnetic anomalies. However, Taylor's next transmission revealed a problem that should have been impossible. "I'm not sure where we are," Taylor reported. "We seem to be off course. I can't make out where we are. Everything looks wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should." These words, preserved in official Navy transcripts, would become some of the most analysed and debated transmissions in aviation history. How could an experienced instructor pilot become completely lost in an area he knew well, using landmarks he had navigated by dozens of times before? The situation deteriorated rapidly as Flight 19's radio transmissions became increasingly frantic. Student pilots reported that their compasses were also malfunctioning, spinning freely rather than maintaining heading. More disturbing still, they reported seeing land where none should exist according to their charts. The islands and coastlines visible below them appeared to be in the wrong positions, creating a navigational nightmare that seemed to defy the basic principles of geography and physics. Fort Lauderdale radio operators attempted to guide Flight 19 home using radio direction finding, but their efforts were hampered by poor radio reception and increasingly incoherent transmissions from the lost aircraft. Taylor's voice, along with those of his students, conveyed growing panic as they realized that nothing in their environment matched their training or expectations. The familiar landmarks of the Bahamas had apparently been replaced by terrain that should not exist. The final transmission from Flight 19 came at approximately 7:04 p.m. more than 4 hours after their scheduled return time. Taylor's voice, barely audible through heavy static, reported that they were running low on fuel and would be forced to ditch in the ocean. "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." Then, silence. The search operation that followed was one of the largest in Navy history, involving hundreds of aircraft, dozens of ships, and thousands of personnel. Martin PBM Mariner flying boats, Coast Guard vessels, and civilian aircraft combed over 300,000 square miles of ocean, searching for any trace of Flight 19 or its crew. The search continued for 5 days, but no wreckage, life rafts, or survivors were ever found. The tragedy deepened when one of the search aircraft, a Martin PBM Mariner with a crew of 13, also vanished without a trace. The Mariner had been conducting a routine search pattern when it simply disappeared from radar, adding 13 more names to the growing list of casualties. Witnesses aboard a passing merchant ship reported seeing an explosion in the sky, but no wreckage from the Mariner was ever recovered. The Navy's official investigation, completed in 1946, concluded that Flight 19 had become lost due to equipment malfunction and pilot error, eventually running out of fuel and crashing into the ocean. However, the investigation raised as many questions as it answered. How could 5 separate aircraft experience simultaneous compass failures? Why were no emergency signals or distress beacons detected? Most puzzling of all, how could experienced pilots become so completely disoriented in familiar waters that they couldn't determine their basic location? The case attracted the attention of Charles Berlitz, whose 1974 book The Bermuda Triangle transformed Flight 19 from a tragic military accident into the centerpiece of one of the 20th century's most enduring mysteries. Berlitz's work, while criticized for its selective use of evidence and speculative conclusions, introduced millions of readers to the idea that certain regions of the ocean might be subject to unknown forces that could interfere with navigation equipment and human perception. Dr. Vincent Gaddis, who first coined the term Bermuda Triangle in a 1964 magazine article, used Flight 19 as evidence for his theory that the region between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico was subject to electromagnetic anomalies that could cause aircraft and ships to vanish without explanation. Gaddis's work inspired decades of research, speculation, and controversy about the nature of these alleged anomalies. The influence of Flight 19 on aviation safety cannot be overstated. The case led to fundamental changes in military training procedures, including requirements for multiple navigation systems, improved radio communication protocols, and enhanced emergency procedures for aircraft experiencing navigation failures. Modern military pilots receive extensive training in dead reckoning navigation, specifically because of the lessons learned from Flight 19's tragedy. Civilian aviation has also been shaped by the Flight 19 incident. Federal Aviation Administration regulations now require multiple redundant navigation systems on commercial aircraft, partly in response to cases where single-point failures led to catastrophic navigation errors. The development of GPS technology was accelerated by military recognition that traditional navigation methods could fail under certain conditions. Popular culture has embraced Flight 19 as a symbol of aviation mystery, inspiring countless books, documentaries, television shows, and movies. The image of military aircraft vanishing without explanation has become deeply embedded in American folklore, representing both the dangers of flight and the limits of human understanding when confronted with the unknown. Scientific investigation of the Flight 19 case has revealed several natural phenomena that could potentially explain some aspects of the disappearance. Electromagnetic anomalies caused by solar activity can interfere with compass readings and radio communications. Temperature inversions in the atmosphere can create visual mirages that make islands appear to be in different locations. Ocean currents in the region are complex and variable, potentially carrying wreckage far from where aircraft might have crashed. Dr. Larry Cushy, author of The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved, conducted exhaustive research into the Flight 19 case and concluded that the disappearance could be explained by a combination of equipment failure, navigational error, and adverse weather conditions. Cush's analysis revealed discrepancies in some popular accounts and argued that supernatural explanations were unnecessary when natural causes could account for the observed facts. However, critics of Cush's analysis point out that it fails to explain some of the most puzzling aspects of the case. The simultaneous compass failures experienced by all 5 aircraft suggest a coordinated external influence rather than random equipment problems. The pilot's reports of seeing land where none should exist cannot be easily dismissed as simple navigational errors by experienced aviators familiar with the region. Modern technology has been applied to re-examine the Flight 19 case, with mixed results. Computer analysis of weather patterns on December 5, 1945, has confirmed that conditions were challenging but not extreme enough to explain the aircraft's disappearance. Satellite mapping of the ocean floor has located numerous aircraft wrecks in the search area, but none have been positively identified as belonging to Flight 19. The development of underwater search technology has made it possible to explore areas of the ocean floor that were inaccessible in 1945. Deep-sea submersibles and remotely operated vehicles have searched for Flight 19's wreckage using sophisticated sonar and imaging equipment. While these searches have located several military aircraft from the World War II era, the distinctive TBM Avengers of Flight 19 have never been found. Psychological analysis of the radio transmissions has revealed patterns consistent with spatial disorientation, a condition that can affect pilots when visual cues become unreliable. However, the transcripts also contain elements that are difficult to explain through conventional psychology, including references to impossible geographic features and coordinated confusion among multiple experienced pilots. The electromagnetic theory for Flight 19's disappearance has gained support from some researchers who studied geomagnetic anomalies in the region. The area where Flight 19 vanished is known to experience variations in magnetic field strength that could potentially interfere with compass readings. However, these anomalies are not strong enough to explain the complete navigation failure reported by the aircraft. Intelligence agencies have declassified some documents related to Flight 19, revealing that the military conducted extensive secret investigations into the disappearance. These documents show that officials were concerned about potential foreign involvement or unknown technological factors that might have contributed to the loss. However, no evidence of hostile action or advanced technology was ever found. The case has influenced modern military training in ways that extend beyond aviation. Flight 19 is studied in military academies as an example of how multiple system failures can cascade into catastrophic situations. The importance of maintaining situational awareness, following emergency procedures, and communicating effectively under stress are all emphasized through analysis of Flight 19's final hours. Recent technological developments have provided new tools for investigating cases like Flight 19, but they have also revealed the limitations of our understanding. Advanced radar systems can now track aircraft with unprecedented precision, yet they still occasionally lose contact with planes in the same region where Flight 19 vanished. GPS technology has revolutionized navigation, but it can still be disrupted by atmospheric conditions or electronic interference. Palatine Light, the burning ship. The fog rolls in thick across Block Island Sound on this December evening in 2023. Transforming the familiar waters off Rhode Island into an alien landscape of grey shadows and muffled sounds. Captain Tom Morrison stands on the bridge of the research vessel Atlantic Explorer, watching his radar screen with the practiced eye of someone who has navigated these waters for over 30 years. His crew is conducting a routine marine survey, mapping the seafloor for a proposed wind farm project. But tonight they've encountered something that doesn't appear on any chart. A bright light has been visible on the horizon for the past hour, moving slowly against the current, appearing and disappearing in the fog bank like a ship in distress. Morrison has tried to raise the mysterious vessel on radio, but receives only silence. As he watches through binoculars, the light seems to flicker and dance, taking on an orange-red glow that reminds him of fire. Dr. Sarah Chen, a marine archaeologist aboard the Explorer, has been documenting unexplained phenomena in Block Island Sound for the past 5 years as part of a comprehensive study of the region's maritime heritage. Tonight's sighting adds to a growing file of similar incidents that occur with disturbing regularity in these waters, always during the winter months, always involving lights that appear to be ships on fire. Local fishermen have reported these sightings for generations, but Chen's research has revealed that the phenomenon may be connected to one of New England's most enduring maritime mysteries, the legend of the Palatine Light, a ghostly ship that has allegedly been sailing these waters for over 2 centuries. The story begins in the harsh winter of 1738, when the merchant vessel Princess Augusta carrying German Palatine immigrants to the New World, found herself trapped in one of the worst storms ever recorded off the New England coast. The ship had departed from Rotterdam months earlier with over 300 passengers seeking new lives in America, but their dreams of prosperity had turned into a nightmare of disease, starvation, and death during the crossing. By the time the Princess Augusta reached American waters, more than half of her passengers had died, and many of the survivors were too weak to care for themselves. Captain George Long stood on the quarterdeck of his ship fighting to maintain control as mountainous waves crashed over the bow and hurricane-force winds tore at the rigging. The Princess Augusta was a sturdy vessel built for the demanding Atlantic crossing, but she was overloaded with passengers and cargo, making her sluggish and difficult to handle in extreme weather. Worse still, many of his crew had fallen ill during the voyage, leaving him short-handed at the moment when he needed every able-bodied sailor to fight for their lives. Below decks, the passengers huddled in darkness, listening to the terrifying sounds of a ship in distress. These were people who had sold everything they owned for passage to America, families who had endured months of hardship in the cramped conditions between decks. They had survived disease, starvation, and the daily horror of watching their loved ones die and be buried at sea. But now they faced their greatest trial as the Princess Augusta fought for her life against the fury of the North Atlantic. The storm had been raging for 3 days when lookouts spotted the sandy shores of Block Island through the driving snow and spray. Captain Long recognised the danger immediately. Block Island was surrounded by treacherous shoals and reefs that had claimed dozens of ships over the years. The local waters were littered with the bones of vessels that had been driven ashore by storms, their crews and passengers lost to the merciless sea. But with his ship taking on water and his rigging failing, Long had no choice but to attempt a desperate run for shelter. What happened next would become the subject of controversy and legend for centuries to come. According to some accounts, the Princess Augusta managed to beach herself on Block Island's shores, allowing most of her passengers and crew to survive. But other versions of the story tell a darker tale of deliberate wrecking by local residents who saw the immigrant ship as an opportunity for profit rather than a humanitarian crisis requiring assistance. The island's residents, known as wreckers, had a reputation for deliberately causing ships to run aground so they could salvage the cargo and valuables. They would display false lights to confuse navigators, making ships believe they were approaching safe harbour when they were actually being lured onto the rocks. The practice was common along the isolated coasts of New England, where poverty and harsh winters made the salvage from shipwrecks a vital source of income. According to the most persistent version of the legend, the islanders not only failed to help the Princess Augusta but actively contributed to her destruction. After the ship grounded on the beach, local residents allegedly boarded her and systematically looted everything of value, including personal belongings of the passengers and the ship's cargo. Some accounts claim that the looters showed no mercy to the sick and dying immigrants, stripping them of their possessions and leaving them to perish in the December cold. The climax of the tragedy, according to legend, came when the wreckers decided to dispose of the evidence of their crimes. Rather than allow the Princess Augusta to remain as a witness to their actions, they set fire to the ship with some of the remaining passengers still aboard. The vessel burned through the night, creating a horrific spectacle visible for miles across the dark waters. Those passengers who had survived the wreck, the looting and the bitter cold were consumed by flames that lit up the December sky like a funeral pyre. One passenger, according to the most detailed accounts, managed to escape the burning ship and make it to shore. This woman, whose name has been lost to history, was said to have cursed the island and its residents with her dying breath, declaring that the Princess Augusta would return every year to remind the world of the crimes committed against innocent people seeking only a chance at a better life. As she spoke these words, the burning ship allegedly broke free from the beach and sailed out into the Sound, still aflame, carrying her curse into the eternal waters. The legend of the Palatine Light was born from this tragedy, and within a few years of the alleged incident, residents of Block Island and the nearby mainland began reporting sightings of a burning ship that appeared in the Sound during winter storms. The vessel was described as a large sailing ship engulfed in flames, sailing against the wind and current, visible for hours before eventually disappearing into the fog or darkness. The sightings always occurred during the anniversary period of the Princess Augusta's loss, typically in December or January, when weather conditions were most severe. These early accounts came from reliable witnesses, fishermen, ship captains, and coastal residents who were familiar with normal maritime traffic in the area. They described seeing the burning ship with remarkable consistency, noting details about her rigging, her size, and the way the flames seemed to consume her hull without actually destroying the vessel. Some witnesses claimed to hear screams and cries for help carried on the wind, while others reported seeing figures moving about the burning deck. The phenomenon gained widespread attention in the 19th century when poets and writers began incorporating the Palatine Light into their works. John Greenleaf Whittier, one of America's most celebrated poets, wrote extensively about the legend in his poem The Palatine, helping to establish the story as part of New England folklore. Whittier's vivid descriptions of the burning ship and its tragic passengers brought the legend to national attention and ensured its place in American maritime mythology. Dr. Edward Mitchell, a historian who has studied Block Island's maritime history for over 4 decades, has compiled hundreds of documented sightings of the Palatine Light spanning more than 2 centuries. His research shows that the sightings follow consistent patterns. They occur most frequently during winter months, usually during periods of severe weather, and witnesses consistently describe similar details about the burning ship's appearance and behaviour. The consistency of these reports across different time periods and witnesses is remarkable, Mitchell notes. We're not dealing with a few isolated incidents or confused observers. The Palatine Light has been seen by hundreds of people over the years, including experienced mariners who know these waters intimately. The phenomenon clearly has some basis in reality, even if we don't fully understand what causes it. Modern investigations have applied scientific methods to the Palatine Light mystery, with researchers using everything from electromagnetic field detectors to thermal imaging cameras in attempts to document and explain the phenomenon. The US Coast Guard has investigated numerous reports of the burning ship, dispatching vessels to search for ships in distress, only to find empty water where witnesses reported seeing the flames. Meteorological analysis has revealed that many Palatine Light sightings occurred during specific atmospheric conditions that can produce optical illusions and unusual light phenomena. Temperature inversions, combined with moisture in the air, can create superior mirages that make distant objects appear as burning ships or other impossible visions. However, this explanation struggles to account for the consistency of the sightings and their specific connection to the Princess Augusta legend. Archaeological investigation of Block Island's shores has revealed evidence of numerous shipwrecks dating back to colonial times, confirming that the waters around the island were indeed treacherous for sailing vessels. Artifacts recovered from these wrecks include items that could have come from immigrant ships like the Princess Augusta, though no definitive physical evidence of the specific vessel has ever been found. The most recent scientific attempt to explain the Palatine Light involved a team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, who spent several winters monitoring the waters around Block Island with sensitive instruments designed to detect unusual phenomena. Their research documented several instances of unexplained light emissions in the areas where the Palatine Light is most commonly reported, but they were unable to determine the source of these emissions. Local residents continue to report sightings of the Palatine Light, with accounts appearing regularly in Block Island newspapers and social media. These modern witnesses describe experiences that closely match historical accounts, suggesting that whatever causes the phenomenon continues to occur. Some recent sightings have been photographed or recorded on video, though the images are typically too unclear to provide definitive evidence. The legend has become deeply embedded in Block Island's cultural identity, with local businesses incorporating the Palatine Light into their names and marketing materials. The island's museum features extensive exhibits about the legend, and guided tours regularly visit locations where the burning ship has been sighted. The phenomenon has become a significant draw for tourists interested in maritime mysteries and ghost stories. Psychological analysis of Palatine Light witnesses has revealed patterns that are consistent with genuine paranormal experiences. Dr. Margaret Foster, a researcher who specializes in anomalous phenomena, has interviewed dozens of witnesses and found that their accounts share specific details that are difficult to explain through conventional psychology or suggestion. These witnesses aren't seeking attention or trying to perpetuate a hoax, Foster explains. Many of them are reluctant to discuss their experiences because they know how incredible they sound. But their accounts have a quality of authenticity that suggests they're reporting genuine experiences, even if we don't understand what they're actually seeing. the Caleuche, Chile's ghost ship of the living dead. In the fog-shrouded waters off Chile's southern coast, where the Pacific meets ancient Mapuche lands, sailors tell of a ship that defies every law of nature. They call it the Caleuche, and those who claim to have seen it speak in whispers, their eyes haunted by memories they wish they could forget. This isn't just another ghost ship story. This is something far more disturbing, far more alive than any phantom vessel should ever be. The legend begins with the Mapuche people, Chile's indigenous inhabitants who have sailed these treacherous waters for over 1,000 years. To them, the Caleuche isn't just a ship, it's a floating gateway between worlds, crewed by the spirits of those who died at sea. But here's where the story takes its first unsettling turn. Unlike other ghost ships that appear empty or skeletal, the Caleuche is said to be brilliantly lit, filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and celebration. Witnesses describe a magnificent vessel, larger than any ship has a right to be, glowing with an otherworldly light that can be seen for miles across the dark ocean. Captain Eduardo Vargas encountered the Caleuche in 1971 while fishing near Sable Island. His testimony, recorded by local authorities, describes a ship that appeared suddenly out of thick fog, music drifting across the water. As his boat drew closer, he could see figures dancing on the deck, but something was wrong with their movements. They seemed to glide rather than walk, their forms shifting and blurring in the strange light. When Vargas called out, the figures turned toward him in perfect unison, and that's when he saw their faces, or rather, where their faces should have been. Just smooth, pale surfaces that somehow conveyed an impossible joy. Vargas ordered his crew to turn back immediately, but as they fled, they heard something that chilled them to the bone. Their own names being called from the ghost ship, sung in perfect harmony by voices they almost recognized. The Caleuche doesn't just appear randomly. According to hundreds of testimonies collected over 2 centuries, it follows specific patterns. It emerges during storms, as if feeding on the chaos of wind and waves. It's drawn to areas where people have drowned, particularly around the dangerous straits between Chile's southern islands. Most disturbing of all, witnesses report that the ship seems to be recruiting, calling to those who see it, promising eternal celebration in exchange for their lives. But modern science offers a different perspective on these encounters. Dr. Maria Santos, a maritime psychologist at the University of Chile, has spent 15 years studying ghost ship sightings along the Chilean coast. Her research suggests that the Caleuche encounters might be explained by a combination of environmental factors and psychological phenomena. The waters around Sable Island are notorious for their unpredictable weather patterns and dense fog banks that can create powerful optical illusions, ships appearing larger than they actually are, lights refracting through mist to create impossible glows, sounds carrying across water in ways that distort their origin. All of these could contribute to supernatural sightings. Dr. Santos points to something called the Fata Morgana effect, a complex form of superior mirage that can make ships appear to hover above the water or seem dramatically larger than their actual size. When combined with the phosphorescence common in these waters, caused by bioluminescent plankton, a normal fishing vessel could appear to glow with ethereal light. The music and voices witnesses describe might be explained by pareidolia, the human tendency to interpret random sounds as familiar patterns, especially when under stress or fear. Yet, even Dr. Santos admits her explanations don't account for all the details in Caleuche encounters. How do you explain multiple witnesses seeing identical details they couldn't have coordinated? Why do sightings occur in areas with no other ships for miles? And perhaps most puzzling, why do some witnesses report seeing people they knew had died at sea among the ship's ghostly crew? The debate intensified in 1994 when the Chilean Navy investigated a mass sighting near Puerto Montt. Over 30 fishing boats reported seeing the Caleuche simultaneously, all describing the same enormous glowing vessel. Navy radar picked up no unusual contacts, but sonar detected something massive moving beneath the surface where witnesses claimed the ghost ship appeared. The official report, declassified in 2010, concluded that while no supernatural explanation could be verified, conventional explanations also failed to account for the observed phenomena. This pattern of modern encounters echoing ancient legends creates an unsettling ripple effect across Chilean maritime culture. Today's fishermen grow up hearing Caleuche stories from their grandfathers, creating a psychological framework that might predispose them to interpret unusual sightings through a supernatural lens. But the influence flows both ways. Modern sightings, documented with GPS coordinates and radio communications, add technological credibility to ancient myths. The Caleuche legend has spread far beyond Chile's borders, inspiring ghost ship reports from Peru to Alaska. Maritime folklore researchers note striking similarities between Chilean Caleuche encounters and phantom ship sightings recorded in Scandinavian fjords, Japanese coastal waters, and the fog-bound coasts of Nova Scotia. It's as if the ocean itself generates these stories, responding to some fundamental human need to populate the vast emptiness with purpose and meaning, even if that meaning is terrifying. In 2019, marine biologist Dr. James Mackenzie led an expedition specifically designed to investigate Caleuche sighting hotspots using modern technology. His team deployed underwater cameras, atmospheric monitoring equipment, and advanced sonar arrays in areas where encounters were most frequently reported. What they discovered challenges both supernatural and purely rational explanations. Their equipment recorded unexplained acoustic anomalies, organised sound patterns that resembled music but originated from no identifiable source. Underwater cameras captured bioluminescent displays that formed geometric patterns too regular to be natural, too complex to be easily explained. Most intriguingly, Dr. Mackenzie's team documented what they termed environmental memory events. In areas where multiple drownings had occurred, their sensitive equipment detected unusual electromagnetic signatures that seemed to repeat in cycles, as if the ocean itself was replaying past tragedies. While Mackenzie stops short of claiming these phenomena prove supernatural activity, he acknowledges they suggest our understanding of how marine environments process and store information is far from complete. The modern Chilean Navy takes Caleuche reports seriously, not because they believe in ghosts, but because the sightings often indicate dangerous weather conditions or underwater hazards. Search and Rescue Coordinator Lieutenant Carlos Mendez explains that Caleuche encounters frequently precede maritime disasters. Whether the ghost ship is a warning or simply a psychological response to environmental dangers that sailors subconsciously detect, the practical result is the same. When fishermen report seeing the Caleuche, the Navy knows to be prepared for emergency calls. This practical approach to supernatural encounters reflects a broader evolution in how maritime authorities handle unexplained phenomena. Rather than dismissing ghost ship reports as superstition, modern coastguards worldwide are learning to treat them as potentially valuable data about ocean conditions, psychological stress factors, and areas where additional safety measures might be needed. The Caleuche, in this context, becomes a kind of maritime early warning system, encoded in cultural memory and transmitted through generations of seafarers. The ripple effects extend into modern technology as well. Smartphone apps popular among Chilean fishermen now include features for reporting unusual sightings, creating a crowdsourced database of anomalous maritime encounters. Social media groups dedicated to documenting modern Caleuche sightings have thousands of members sharing photos, videos, and GPS coordinates of encounters. While most submissions have conventional explanations, some defy easy categorization, adding new chapters to a legend that refuses to fade into history. Most remarkably, the Caleuche legend is evolving to incorporate modern elements. Recent reports describe the ghost ship equipped with contemporary navigation lights and radar arrays, as if the supernatural vessel is adapting to technological changes in maritime culture. Some witnesses claim to hear electronic music mixed with traditional folk songs drifting from the phantom ship, suggesting that even supernatural phenomena might evolve with human culture. MV Joyita, the partial wreck that defied explanation, Maritime Investigation File hash 7429, date opened, October 10th, 1955, status unsolved. The disappearance and partial recovery of the merchant vessel Joyita remains one of the Pacific's most puzzling maritime mysteries. What makes this case unique isn't that a ship vanished without a trace. It's that only half of it ever came back, and what that half revealed raised more questions than it answered. On October the 5th, 1955, the MV Joyita departed Samoa's Apia harbour, bound for the Tokelau Islands, carrying 25 passengers and crew members, along with cargo destined for the remote Pacific communities. The 70-foot converted World War II Navy vessel should have completed the 270-mile journey in less than 2 days. Instead, the Joyita vanished completely, triggering one of the largest search operations in South Pacific history. 5 weeks later, when hope had all but faded, a merchant ship spotted something floating partially submerged near Vanuatu in Fiji, 600 miles south of the Joyita's intended route. What rescuers found defied every expectation. The Joyita's bow section floated low in the water, gutted and stripped of everything valuable, but structurally intact enough to have drifted for weeks. The stern section was completely gone, as if surgically removed. More disturbing still, there was no trace of the 25 souls who had been aboard. No bodies, no life rafts, no distress equipment, nothing to indicate what had happened to the passengers and crew during those missing weeks. Let's examine the evidence systematically, starting with the vessel's condition when discovered. Official inspection reports document extensive damage to the superstructure, but curiously, this damage appeared to be from salvage operations rather than maritime disaster. Windows had been deliberately broken, not shattered by storm waves. Interior fixtures had been carefully removed, not torn away by violent seas. Most significantly, the ship's logbook, cargo manifest, and all navigation equipment were missing, items that would normally remain secured even in severe weather. The passenger manifest tells its own troubling story. Among those aboard were Judge Henry Honoré, one of Samoa's most prominent legal figures, travelling with confidential government documents. Also listed were several European passengers carrying substantial amounts of cash and jewellery, making the Joyita an unusually valuable target for the region. The crew roster included Captain Thomas Dusty Miller, an experienced Pacific navigator with an impeccable safety record, and his son Chuck, serving as first mate. Neither had any history of reckless seamanship or poor judgment. Physical evidence from the wreck site provides crucial clues about the vessel's final hours. Marine investigators found that the Joyita's cargo hold had been deliberately flooded, but not by storm damage. Someone had opened the seacox valves that allow water to enter the hull in what appeared to be an attempt to scuttle the ship. However, the vessel's cork-lined hull, installed during its military conversion, provided enough buoyancy to keep the forward section afloat even when flooded. This explains why only half the ship was eventually recovered. The heavy stern section, containing the engine room and most of the cargo, would have sunk immediately when separated from the buoyant bow. The search operation itself reveals important details about the timeline. Royal New Zealand Air Force planes conducted extensive aerial sweeps beginning October 7th, just 2 days after the Joyita's scheduled arrival. These flights covered thousands of square miles of ocean between Samoa and the Tokelau Islands, but found no trace of the missing vessel. Weather records from the period show calm seas and favourable conditions, ruling out storm damage as a primary cause of the disaster. More puzzling, several other vessels transited the same route during the search period, without reporting any debris or distress signals. Witness testimony from the departure adds another layer to the mystery. Harbour workers in Apia reported that the Joyita appeared heavily loaded when it left port, riding lower in the water than normal for a vessel of its size. Some passengers had complained about cramped conditions and the amount of cargo packed into available spaces. More significantly, dock workers noticed several passengers carrying unusually large amounts of luggage and appearing nervous about the journey. The investigation into Captain Miller's background reveals a competent mariner with extensive Pacific experience, but also a man facing financial difficulties. Miller had recently invested heavily in the Joyita, converting her from military surplus to passenger service. The vessel was his primary source of income, and several crew members later testified that Miller had seemed stressed about making payments on his investment. However, none of this suggests he would deliberately endanger passengers or engage in criminal activity. Official maritime records show that the Joyita had passed its most recent safety inspection, though with several minor violations noted. The vessel's radio equipment was listed as functional but not recently tested. Life raft capacity was adequate for the number of people aboard, and emergency supplies met minimum requirements. These facts make the complete disappearance of all passengers and crew even more perplexing. Now, let's examine the primary theories that have emerged from this evidence. Theory 1. Piracy and murder. This explanation suggests that the Joyita was attacked by pirates who killed everyone aboard and attempted to sink the vessel after stripping it of valuables. The deliberate flooding of the cargo hold supports this theory, as does the systematic removal of valuable items from the superstructure. The South Pacific in 1955 was experiencing increased piracy activity, particularly around remote island chains, where law enforcement was minimal. However, this theory struggles to explain why pirates would travel 600 miles south to dispose of the evidence, or why they would only partially succeed in sinking such a small vessel. Theory 2. Mechanical failure and abandonment. Maritime engineers propose that the Joyita suffered catastrophic engine failure or hull breach, forcing passengers and crew to abandon ship in life rafts. Under this scenario, the partial sinking occurred naturally, and the systematic stripping happened during the weeks the wreckage drifted unmanned. Local islanders or passing vessels could have salvaged valuable items before the official discovery. This theory explains the physical evidence but fails to account for why no trace of the life rafts or survivors was ever found, despite extensive search efforts covering all inhabited islands in the region. Theory 3. Insurance fraud and staged disappearance. Some investigators believe Captain Miller deliberately scuttled his vessel to collect insurance money, arranging for passengers and crew to be secretly transported to another location. The financial pressures Miller faced and the suspicious circumstances of the vessel's loading support this theory. However, the insurance payout was relatively modest compared to the complexity such a scheme would require, and none of the missing persons ever surfaced anywhere else in the world. Theory 4. Mutiny and internal violence. This disturbing possibility suggests that conflict arose among passengers or crew during the voyage, leading to violence that resulted in multiple deaths and the decision to sink the vessel. Judge Honoré's presence aboard, carrying sensitive legal documents, might have made him a target for those seeking to prevent certain information from reaching its destination. The careful manner in which the ship was stripped and scuttled suggests knowledge of maritime procedures that crew members would possess. Each theory has supporting evidence, but none fully explains all the observed facts. The piracy theory doesn't account for the unusual drift pattern or the selective nature of what was removed from the wreck. The mechanical failure scenario can't explain the deliberate flooding or the systematic stripping of valuables. The insurance fraud theory lacks sufficient financial motive and requires an impossibly complex conspiracy. The mutiny theory, while explaining some evidence, doesn't address why no survivors ever came forward or were discovered. Additional complications emerge when we examine the official response to the investigation. The colonial governments of Samoa and Fiji conducted separate inquiries that reached different conclusions, and some witness testimony was never properly recorded or has since been lost. Several passengers aboard the Joyita were carrying documents related to ongoing political tensions in the region, leading to speculation that the disappearance might have had political motivations that authorities preferred not to investigate thoroughly. Modern forensic techniques have been applied to surviving evidence from the case, but with limited success. The wreckage itself was eventually scrapped, destroying potential evidence that current technology might have been able to analyse more effectively. Photographs and written reports from 1955 lack the detail needed for contemporary investigative methods. Attempts to locate and interview surviving family members of the missing persons have yielded no new information about their final days or any unusual circumstances preceding the voyage. The Joyita case has influenced maritime safety regulations throughout the Pacific region, particularly regarding passenger manifest requirements and radio communication protocols. Modern vessels operating in remote Pacific waters are required to carry more sophisticated emergency equipment and maintain regular contact with shore-based authorities. These changes might have prevented a similar disappearance from remaining undetected for weeks, but they don't bring us closer to understanding what actually happened in October 1955. Weather pattern analysis using historical data has revealed that the Joyita's wreckage followed ocean currents that would naturally carry debris from the Samoa-Tokelau route toward Fiji, but only if the vessel had drifted for several weeks before being discovered. This supports theories involving gradual sinking or abandonment, but doesn't distinguish between mechanical failure, piracy, or other causes. The timing also suggests that whatever happened to the Joyita occurred relatively early in its voyage, possibly within hours or days of departure. Psychological profiles of the missing passengers reveal no obvious connections or shared enemies that might explain a targeted attack. Most were ordinary travellers, government officials, merchants, and family members visiting relatives in the outer islands, However, the combination of Judge Honoree's legal documents and the substantial cash and valuables carried by several passengers created an unusually attractive target for criminal activity. Whether this was coincidence or the result of planning remains unknown. The search for the Joyita's missing stern section has continued sporadically over the decades, using increasingly sophisticated sonar and underwater imaging technology. Deep-water surveys have located numerous shipwrecks in the suspected area, but none have been definitively identified as the Joyita's missing half. The ocean floor in this region reaches depths of several thousand feet, making comprehensive searches extremely expensive and technically challenging. Case file hash 7429 remains officially open, though active investigation ceased decades ago. 25 people vanished without explanation, leaving behind families who never learned the truth about their final hours. The evidence suggests human agency rather than natural disaster, but whether that agency was criminal, desperate, or something else entirely may never be determined. What we know for certain is that the MV Joyita carried secrets into the Pacific depths that October morning, and only half of her ever returned to tell a story that raises more questions than answers, leaving us to confront the uncomfortable reality that some mysteries resist even our most determined efforts to solve them. We have sailed through 3 hours of darkness, from ancient lighthouses to modern mysteries, across oceans that hold more secrets than answers. Each story we've encountered is a wave in the endless tide of maritime enigma, reminding us that despite all our technology and knowledge, the sea remains fundamentally unknowable. The lighthouse keepers are long gone, the ghost ships have faded into legend, and the missing crews remain forever silent. Yet their stories persist, passed from sailor to sailor, generation to generation, because they speak to something essential about our relationship with the sea. As the fog rolls in and another watch begins, one truth endures. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, beyond the reach of our lights and instruments, the ocean continues its ancient work of creating mysteries that will outlive us all. The sea remembers everything and forgets nothing,